Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
It's going to be an experience,
she remembered Paul saying as the car pulled up to the ranch-style Airbnb. Cynthia could already feel this was a bad idea. She had been open to Paul's silly horror ideas in the past, regardless of their stupidity or his demented teetering towards the unreal. As her eyes focused on the house with the dirt-saddled siding and withered bushes in the front, on the theme for the creepy attraction, she let out a long sigh without realizing it.
Oh, come on,
Paul said. She looked away from the house, meeting her husband's excitable eyes. What?
You sighed.
No.
Yes, you did.
I did not, she exclaimed, knowing she was a liar. Whatever, she added, unbuckling her seatbelt. She looked back at the quirky house as the strap smacked into place. It had eyes leering right at her. They were just windows to the living room, but in her mind, they blinked. She knew this was impossible, but she was in a staring contest with the house, built on the land where the bodies of several children were broken and slain. She felt the sweat in her armpits and breasts.
Let's see our castle for the night, my queen,
Paul said, offering the sarcastic dumb face she had seen before. Usually, it made her laugh. This time, it made her bite the inside of her cheek. Paul jumped out of the car, and the slamming of the door made her jump in her seat. She watched her husband smile with glee, looking at where they were to spend their only vacation in the past 7 months. As she unbuckled her seatbelt, reached into the back seat, and pulled out her vintage Polaroid camera. It had been one of the many finds during her thrifting years, and she was amazed she could still buy film for it online. As she opened the door, she used her car's hood to balance her shot and snapped a photo with a wheeze. She pulled the picture out, waving it in the air, keenly aware there was something wrong. The windows to the soul of Mr. Frowny's house were still peering at her. The door creaked as Paul pushed with his hip.
Lucy, I'm home,
he yelled. Dropping their suitcases near his feet, he looked across the house and was shocked by the bleakness. The ad told him there was very little to want in the place, but for such an infamous location, he expected a little bit of pizzazz. There was a used plaid couch, either left to collect dust or bought from a local thrift store, with a family of bedbugs in tow. Beside it was an eclectic chair, antique, ugly, and worn. There were plenty of rips along the handle and a fresh set of cobwebs near its feet. In the corner was an old TV stereo console with dusty vinyl sets and an empty decanter in the middle of 4 bemired glasses. Paul knew right away they would not spend hardly any time in the living room, unless Cynthia would go through with the Ouija board. They had spent a lot of money on the rental, and he hoped she at least tried for his sake. He didn't ask a lot from her, but from the look on her face, that might not be the case. A rumble from behind him pulled him out of his head. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, still holding onto her bags.
Pretty sparse, yep,
he said, looking back into the living room. "You don't expect us to stay here?"
Why not?
"There's no furniture."
You saw that in the ad. They wrote that.
I thought maybe it was a joke or something. Paul's eyes lit up.
I wonder if he fucked someone up on the couch?
Paul? He ignored her.
Like maybe he had a kid sitting in this chair.
He started, walking towards the living room.
And then, with his frown and all, he sliced their throat.
Paul gestured across his throat, a frown on his face the whole time. That's not funny.
Oh shit, lighten up. You were all about this place when I showed you.
I know, but
But what?
it's fucking creepy.
Durr. That's the whole point.
She nodded her head, but still held tight to her bag, standing in the entryway.
Please come in?
He asked. Cynthia stood her ground, the clutch of her bag scrunched in her hand. Paul walked forward and reached for her hand.
Come on.
She let him pull her in, as if proving to the house she was not a willing participant. Something about this comforted her a bit. As she walked in, she set her things on the TV console as they headed towards the living room. The Polaroid picture fell out of her unzipped purse as it all settled. If she had looked at the picture before stuffing it down her purse, she would have seen a pair of long red shoes and a puffy red wig sticking out from behind the unkept bushes to the side of the house. Emanating from the picture, a laugh is heard and softly disappears. The hallway was just as spare. As they walked along, Cynthia noticed a few frames had been removed, the rectangular remnants staining the outdated wallpaper. She rubbed her finger along the outline and turned her head to realize she was alone. "Paul?" she said. "Paul!" She walked a few steps before Paul jumped out from one of the rooms. "You asshole!" she screamed, slapping him a few times on the arm. With a huge smile, Paul laughed.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have.
"Fucking asshole," she uttered, putting her hands on her chest. "Don't do that, ever again."
I won't, but you got to see this.
She could feel her heart pound through the black lace of her shirt, afraid of what made Paul so excited. When Paul had showed her the Airbnb ad, she was just as thrilled by the idea, and as there was no way a city would let a house be built on a site where over 15 kids had been murdered at the circus, right in the tent next to the black Ferris wheel in 1943. It had been labeled the crime of the century, but only by those who lived nearby. With the war going on, it hardly made the newspaper at all, appearing on the third page from the dedicated reporter who was only writing locally because of a 4F for bad eyesight. Little did they know what a cult following Mr. Frowny, the killer clown, would have over 60 years later. So, when Paul suggested they spend the night, Cynthia trusted her gut it would be safe. Upon entering the room, all she felt was her gut tightening. Sprawled across the room was every clown paraphernalia possible. Punching bags, fast food toys with their mascot gleaming on the plastic. Even a poster from the Burns Tire Company, whose mascot, Bosco the Mechanic Clown, was smiling and waving for people to come in and fix their tires. It was a cornucopia of big-top memorabilia, the likes any coulrophobe would petrify upon entering.
Isn't it incredible?
Paul asked. "This is fucking gross," she spoke softly, staring at a jack-in-the-box already popped open and wobbling from the air vent.
I know, right? Amazing.
Her eyes searched the room, afraid to stop on any one item. Her gut strained more, and she knew they should leave. "Paul,
There it is.
He interrupted and rushed towards the deck in the corner. He reached for his phone, scrolling a bit, and gleamed
It
at
says this desk sits on the same fairgrounds where he created Mr. Frowny before he was killed. It also says he would tie them in the corner and make them watch him put his makeup on. Look at that.
he yelled, pointing in the corner. Cynthia dreaded looking, knowing it would be there, hanging from an old antique rack. She stared at him instead, willing to fight the urge, but it was too much. Drooped along the rack was the red and blue suit she had seen plenty of times in the crime scene photos. Most were black and white, so seeing the suit in all of its variegated glory, too much of a thrill. Her heart pulsed in her neck, but not like before. This was from happiness. This was about catching the prey of the hunter. She was looking at Mr. Frowny's death robe and hated how much she loved it.
Totally rad.
Paul foolishly spoke. You think it's... She started to speak.
His? No fucking way. That's in an evidence box somewhere.
Her eyes focused on the bronze stains along the front. But look.
It's fake blood.
He said, walking over and grabbing it. Paul! She screamed.
See?
He said, holding it up to her.
His suit would be way bloodier, but I give them credit. It looks pretty close. Smells like shit.
She shook her head, knowing he had made some mistake somehow. Paul saw her reaction.
Oh, stop, Sin. It's all in showmanship.
He dropped the garment and looked past her towards the wall.
Look at that.
Above the makeup station hung a felt painting of a clown. But they knew exactly who it was supposed to be. They had a different version in their basement, above their Blu-rays and autograph collection from famous horror movie stars. Theirs was done by an artist who panhandled at the conventions. This was done by someone long since forgotten. Looking at the two of them was Mr. Frowny, a clown with a painted-on frown, smiling the widest grin with sickly teeth. In his hands were a bunch of balloons and a long, sharp knife dripping with blood. A group of young children formed a circle around him, their popped balloons dropping in their hands, crying as their tears spilled upon the ground littered with popcorn and funnel cakes. She was horrified by the painting. This is too weird, babe," she finally said. He would not have admitted it to her, but so was Paul. He collected his thoughts for a second before responding.
No, it's not. It's the best. Oh my gosh, look. His eyeliner.
God damn it, Paul! I'm done. He realized it had gone a bit too far and held up his arms in defeat.
Let's order some dinner. Hot dogs?
She was already out the door halfway through his sentence.
Oh, stop it. That was funny.
He added and walked out after her. As they argued down the hallway, a faint sound of the circus came from the closet door. A small beam of yellowish strobing light rose from the crack underneath, like the top of a carousel spinning around and around. From inside the light, a few kernels of bloodied popcorn fell to the ground as the ghostly laughter of children turned into distant screams. For Cynthia, the knock on the door could not have come soon enough. She had been starving ever since they had been lied to when it said the house was stocked with food. Not the absence of food bothered her as much as it was just another thing to add to the hatred of the Mr. Frowny house vacation. Paul opened the door.
Perfect,
He said, already salivating from the smell of the delivery pizza. Paul thought the guy was in his early 20s, making the best out of a life that would only get harder. Paul felt he better tip a little more.
Here you go.
He said, handing over an extra $5.
I didn't know anybody ever stayed here. Is it spooky and shit?
The pizza delivery boy asked.
Oh, yeah.
Paul answered.
Are there body parts and bones and shit?
Paul thought for a second before answering.
Yep.
Gnarly!
The pizza delivery boy smiled and walked away from the house. Paul placed the pizza down on the kitchen table and looked at Cynthia. She reloaded the Polaroid, sipping on a warm glass of whiskey they had brought along.
Need a refill?
This is my second, so no, she answered back. She knew it was not wise to be drinking, but somehow she had to shake these feelings away, and it was too early for the happy vape. Paul surveyed the feast before him and smiled. Cynthia saw this and knew she loved him more than ever. Her mind told her to capture the precious moment. She whipped out her Polaroid, flashed Paul with a mouthful of pizza, and pulled the film to shake it.
Here.
He said, throwing a slice of pizza in front of her. She reached over to pull it closer, setting the picture down, when she froze. In the middle of the picture, behind the kitchen archway, was a poof of red, curly hair popping out. She shoved the chair back, sliding her plate to the floor.
What the fuck?
He yelled. She pointed. The fucking picture! Someone's here, Paul!
Where?
He yelled. The fucking living room! Paul jumped out of his seat and ran to the other room. "Paul!" she yelled. Paul turned the corner, glancing around the room, and spun back at her.
There's nothing here.
"What?"
Come see.
he said, waving his arms around.
There's nothing here.
Cynthia rushed over and saw with her own eyes. They were the only people in the room. "What the fuck is going on?" she softly spoke to herself.
Look, Sin, you gotta...
Now she was mad. "Look!" She ran for the picture and held it up. "Look!" she demanded. He felt it was kind of cute, but his stomach was usually the boss, and the boss was not happy.
Okay.
Cynthia held it out farther, as if to guarantee he would see the red hair. She shook the photo at him so hard she popped her elbow. Paul tucked his long hair behind his ears and adjusted his glasses. After a few seconds, he looked up at her.
What am I looking at?
Her eyes grew from anger. "Are you fucking kidding me?"
I don't see anything but my ugly face.
She whipped the picture around and saw for herself. Nothing was there but Paul and his stringy pizza. The hair was gone. She looked up and was about to speak, but the words weren't there.
I'm going to finish this delicious meal. I love the enthusiasm, though.
"Paul, I swear, it was there." Paul nodded sarcastically.
Oh, yeah, sure.
He added, taking another bite. "Paul, it was... She tried to struggle to find the words. Was the house getting to her? She asked herself. She knew she had seen it. She held the picture closer to her eyes, but nothing was there. When she came to terms with her sanity, she threw the Polaroid on the table and slumped in her chair. Slurping up a long string of cheese that fell on his chin, Paul smiled at her with food behind his teeth. "Shut up," she muttered under her breath and looked toward the living room, before the fear of seeing the hair again made her look away. When she ordered them online, Cynthia could not wait for their arrival, and when she saw them, she had to post a picture immediately. But in the middle of the macabre house, the pajamas Paul wore looked silly as he brushed his teeth before bed. Not to mention her newly discovered distaste for the clown design all over. "I should have burned those when I got them."
How dare you?
He muttered through foamy lips.
We should have gotten matching pairs.
That would be a no. He shrugged and looked back in the mirror, the foam looking like a mad smile. He spat into the sink and looked up, his maddening eyes locked with hers. She could see the light bulb slowly brighten in his mind. Although she was afraid to ask, she could not help herself. "What?" He slammed the Ouija board in the middle of the dirty emerald shag carpet and just smiled that grin she loved and despised all at once. "No, Paul," she said, shaking her head.
We have to,
He responded. "No, we don't. We fucking don't." The smile waned.
What is your problem? We've been talking about this since we booked the place. Now you're chicken?
Just because I don't want to do it doesn't mean I'm a chicken, dick. Paul ignored her and opened the box to place things around him. He knew she could be like this, but it was getting to him this time. They could have gone anywhere with the money they saved up, but Paul booked this for her. A few clicks of a mouse didn't make him her knight shining armor, but he wanted to make her happy. Cynthia had been enamored with the fear of clowns, and when the ad appeared, he knew this was the place to do just that. But here she was, crossing her arms with a face contorted in angst. Though he knew it was a bad idea, his mind told him to set it up anyways. It wasn't working. As Paul set down the chewed-upon pencil on the planchette, he looked deep into her eyes.
Sin, just... come on. We said we would do this.
Yeah, like I changed my mind, okay?
No, it's not.
Well, too bad,
Now who's being a dick?
he sarcastically added, knowing well it would do nothing. Cynthia just spun around toward the hallway, hearing the door to the bedroom slam hard.
Fuck!
He yelled, hoping she would hear it. He sat there for a few minutes, knowing he could not play himself. It would be pathetic to move the pencil himself, worry the board was a fake. He waited a bit longer before getting up, kicking the board, and heading toward the bedroom. The planchette moved slightly as the door opened, and they began to argue more as the pencil scribbled, "Ha ha 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 ha." A faint laugh of a little child emanated from the vent. A sharp set of pink-stained teeth gnarled on popcorn as the children screamed in the background, begging for an adult to save their innocent souls. As Mr. Frowny pulled out a Zippo lighter with the drawing of clowns playing poker to light his drooly cigar, he lifted the knife into the air, the carousel lights glistening across the wet blood. Before he brought it down, somehow, beyond the bounds of reality, the frown turned upside down to a smile on his face. Cynthia woke from the nightmare, the sheets soaked on her naked chest. Gathering her wits, she spun around, knowing the clown was right there, until realizing it was all a bad dream. Paul's snoring helped her ease back from dreamland and nudged him to roll over, an every-night routine they were now accustomed to.
No.
He mumbled and rolled over. She looked at the clock from 1982 and saw the white squares read 3:46 before flipping to 3:47. She pulled the damp sheets off her body, and as she lifted herself out of bed with her feet, she slipped on her underwear and fell hard on her back. She pained at the wind being knocked out of her and rolled over to breathe, her eyes wide, looking under the bed. A pair of rat-like yellow eyes glistened, and a white-gloved hand sprung toward her. She screamed, backing away as fast as she could, slamming her back against the wall. Paul, grabbing her arms, made her scream again, fiercer than before, knowing it was the clown. Whatever breath she could take was lost in a fit of painful coughing. Realizing she had taken her eyes away, she quickly looked under the bed. Saw nothing.
Hey, Sin!
Paul screamed, unaware he was shaking her a bit as he pulled her up. No! No! She screamed, thrashing him away, eyes never leaving the empty dark space below the bed.
What is the matter?
Paul demanded. He's under the bed!
Who?
She tried to speak, but the pain inside was too much. Then she broke down in his arms. Paul held her tighter, feeling her tears soaking his goofy pajamas. Please look under the bed, she asked, knowing he would see nothing.
All right,
Paul said. As Paul pulled the sheets over the bed, she knew nothing. Paul turned to her, a mixture of worry and anger on his face. I saw it, she yelled through tears.
Sin.
He started and was cut off when she bolted toward the door.
Wait!
She tried to open the door, but Paul grabbed her arm. She met him with a few slaps.
Stop!
He yelled, but they kept coming until he finally backed away.
What is the matter with you?
I want to leave, she yelled, wiping away the tears. Let me go!
We're not leaving. Stop it.
Fuck you, I am!
Stop it right now.
I need to leave.
You're the one who wanted to come to this place.
I saw a fucking clown under the bed.
Nothing's there.
He said slowly to emphasize her insanity.
Go to bed.
It worked, as she realized she might lose a little more than tears. In the back of her mind, she felt the rational person who got her through the hardships of life shake their head in disapproval. She could only shake her head at him, knowing she could not return. I can't. Paul waved his hand at her.
I'm going back to bed,
he said, and started to walk toward the bed. No, Paul, listen to me, she said, leaning a little towards him, but knew better than to get anywhere near the bed.
Enough,
he said, snapping around. Paul could feel he was at the edge. He could see she knew as well. They had gone through a few bad moments a few years before, and Paul swore he would never go back, knowing the answer was in bed. Cynthia wiped her tears and walked out of the room. Paul shook his head and pulled the dry side of the sheets over his shoulders. She rushed into the bathroom and cranked the faucet with her shaky hand. She splashed the lukewarm water on her face and froze when she looked in the mirror. Hundreds of white balloons, streaked with bloody little hands, spun on their strings in the reflection behind her. Something was rattling inside the balloons as they turned. The balloons stopped spinning and exploded all at the same time. Kernels of popcorn covered her entire body, her naked flesh smeared with oily butter and blood. She felt some butter drip from her nipple and drop into the sink. She tried to scream, but her vocal cords were frozen, a small click of her throat coming out of her gaping mouth. A small glow of light illuminated from the bottom crack of the linen closet as the faint laughter of a crazed clown was feebly heard. Cynthia found the puissance to scream and rushed to the door that would not open. Her hands, drenched in butter, kept slipping across the doorknob each time. The handle to the closet door latched open. Cynthia knew she would die if she turned around and with all her being tried to turn the slippery handle. The closet door creaked with a festering grievance, the laughter louder and spurting from the monstrous throat with vaporous misery. Paul would have heard her scream by now, she thought, and knew this entity was stopping her cries for help. Yet she screamed so loud a vessel cracked in her throat. Instantly, she had no voice anymore. Desperate and feeling it was her last chance, she grasped hard on the handle. The door flung open as she ran down the hallway, unable to scream. Cynthia slammed on the bedroom door and ran down the hall till it disappeared. Cynthia stopped. She couldn't believe her own eyes. The door at the end leading to the bedroom was the same, but halfway it formed into a circus tunnel, spinning around with little holes that blasted light cylinders. She heard the hideous laugh behind her and knew she had to keep going. She took a few brave steps, but her feet slipped, streaking with buttery blood. She held her hands out to regain control, only to look up at the hallway made of mirrors and a door at the end of the tunnel. She ran toward the door, refusing to see the wretched appearance of the clown following her. She reached for the handle when the door creaked open. The scream of a child being ripped apart in the distance. Staring at her in the darkness of a void were crimson eyes, cracked with ruptured veins and a set of rotten teeth. Floating in the air like the Cheshire Cat, a chewed cigar billowing smoke through the diseased gaps. Cynthia tried her best to catch her feet as she slid along the mirrored floor, gaining speed until she fell into the darkness, the door slamming shut. Behind the door, Cynthia was able to scream again. Paul kept rolling over, thinking about what she said, acting like a lunatic. He flipped over once more before getting out of bed. He felt some reserve in the back of his neck, placing his feet near the bed frame in case she was right, but nothing swept him under, and he was ready to have her warmth next to him in bed. Before he could call her, he opened the door and planted his feet on something soggy. He lifted his foot and was caught off guard by the mushy red popcorn stuck between his toes.
Sin?
He yelled. No answer.
Cynthia, where are you?
He yelled again and looked down the hallway. Sprawled along the hallway was a long line of bloodied popcorn, trailing from their bedroom to the basement door. He ran toward the door, but it seemed forever to reach it. Every step eternity in his fear of what might have happened to her. He finally reached the door, and when he pulled it open, a menagerie of rainbow balloons sprung at him. Bloodied handprints streaked across each one.
Cynthia!
He heard himself yell from far away, brushing the balloons away from his view. From behind, a large pink clown shoe, size 36.5, kicked Paul down the stairs. He tried his best to stop the fall, but after he slammed his meaty shoulder on the 4th step, ripping his obnoxious pajama shirt, he knew he would journey till the end, broken bones and all. He finally hit the very bottom, falling into a sea of balloons. When he emerged a few seconds later, blood rushed hard from the gash in his head, and his hand throbbed. Ignoring the pain, he yelled,
"Cynthia!"
and he knew in his heart she would not answer. As scared as he was, he still moved forward, thrashing through the waves of balloons.
"Cynthia, where are you?"
From inside the balloons, she started to laugh a little. Slowly and softly, it grew after each mucusy howl.
"Where are you? Sin?"
He beckoned. The laugh grew stronger as he threw the balloons around, hopelessly reaching to find her. From above the stairs, a giant shadow cast on the wall. The carousel lights appeared again and a faint hint of its music aural, but only behind the deafening sounds of children laughing, popcorn popping, and oily machines spinning. Paul looked as a silhouette of a woman dwarfed the wall, and he ran to her. The relief in his heart was destroyed by the goosebumps that sprang all over his body. At the top of the stairs, dressed in the clown suit from the bedroom and eating a bag of popcorn spritzed with blood, was Cynthia. A frown painted on her mangled and gashed face. As she opened her mouth, slicing the edges of her mouth, Mr. Frowny's rancid laugh disgorged from her slit throat. Paul screamed, pressing his fingers so hard to the handrail he split the fractures further down the bone. As painful as it would be to others, Paul was only aware of the pain and fear in his lucid mind. Her eyes opened wide, blood oozing from her sockets. She laughed harder as pieces of skin slid off her face. Paul could not grasp the fear taking over his being. The woman he loved, with whom he shared his life, was gone. He knew inside his rapidly beating heart he no longer saw his beloved, but a monster. To get as far from it as possible, he backed down the steps, sinking into the stream of balloons, and felt something brush across his legs. Then he heard them inside the plastic basin, the children trolling from laughter to screaming in the same breath. Fearing this sound would be the last he ever heard, he pleaded to it.
"Cynthia, help, please."
Mr. Frowny's laugh disappeared, and she began to cry as her face slid off her skull. Paul saw this, and his mind clenched. He tried to crab walk back when the little hands crawled out of the rubbery horizon. There was enough time for him to notice their tiny, rotted arms, the pale gray skin cracking and filled with bloody pus. Some of their hands grabbed his loony pajamas, and some his legs. One even grabbed his fingers, breaking them even further with the strength of a vice. As he tried to convince himself it was all just a bad dream, he made the mistake of looking over into the far corner. A spotlight turned on from nowhere on Mr. Frowny, a chewed cigar in one hand and the other a rusted cleaver, older than the longest living person alive. "You're in for the experience of your lifetime," Mr. Frowny said, laughing. Paul's mind ceased as the screaming and laughing children pulled him down into the grave of balloons. As the new renters entered the back bedroom filled with a plethora of clown relics collecting dust from years of neglect, they noticed a painting in its velvety glory and were ecstatic by its eerie scenery. In the middle of the painting, like a jester performing for a king, the children's favorite clown, Mr. Frowny, frowned as the little devils pranced around him. The children seemed happy as they had two new friends. One was in a clown suit with a smiling skull, and the other was wearing the silliest pair of pajamas you ever saw.
Yes, I've been haunted. Haunted so fearfully that for some little time I thought myself insane. I was no raving maniac. I mixed in society as heretofore, although perhaps a trifle more grave and taciturn than usual. I pursued my daily avocations. I employed myself even on literary work. To all appearance, I was one of the sanest of the sane. And yet, all the while, I considered myself the victim of such strange delusion that in my own mind I fancied my senses, and one sense in particular, so far erratic and beyond my own control that I was, in real truth, a madman. How far I was then insane must be for others, who hear my story, to decide. My hallucinations have long since left me, and, at all events, I am now as sane as I suppose most men are. My first attack came on one afternoon when, being in a listless and idle mood, I had risen from my work and was amusing myself with speculating at my window on different personages who were passing before me. At that time, I occupied apartments in the Brompton Road. Perhaps there's no thoroughfare in London where the ordinary passengers are so varied, a description or high life or low life mingle in so perpetual a medley. South Kensington carriages there jostle costermongers' carts. The clerk in the public office, returning to his suburban dwelling, brushes the labor coming from his work on the never-ending modern constructions in the new district. And the ladies of some of the surrounding squares flaunt the most gigantic of chignons and the most exuberant of motley dresses before the envying eyes of the ragged girls with their vegetable baskets. There was, as usual, plenty of material for observation and conjecture in the passengers, and their characters or destinations from my window on that day. Yet I was not in the right cue for the thorough enjoyment of my favorite amusement. I was in a rather melancholy mood. Somehow or other, I don't know why, my memory had reverted to a pretty woman whom I had not seen for many years. She had been my first love, and I had loved her with a boyish passion as genuine as it was intense. I thought my heart would have been broken, and I certainly talked seriously of dying, when she formed an attachment to an ill-conditioned, handsome young adventurer, and on her family objecting to such an alliance, eloped with him. I had never seen the fellow, against whom, however, I cherished a hatred almost as intense as my passion for the infatuated girl who had flown from her home for his sake. We had heard of her being on the continent with her husband, and learned that the man's shifty life had taken him to the east. For some years, nothing more had been heard of the poor girl. It was a melancholy history, and its memory ill-disposed me for amusement. A sigh was probably just escaping my lips with the half-articulated words, "Poor Julia," when my eyes fell on a man passing before my window. There was nothing particularly striking about him. He was tall, with fine features and a long, fair beard, contrasting somewhat with his bronzed complexion. I'd seen many of our officers on their return from the Crimea look much the same. Still, the man's aspect gave me a shuddering feeling. I don't know why. At the same moment, a whispering, low voice uttered aloud in my ear the words, "It is he." I turned, startled. There was no one near me, no one in the room. There was no fancy in the sound. I heard the words with painful distinctness. I ran to the door, opened it. Not a sound on the staircase. Not a sound in the whole house. Nothing but the hum from the street. I came back and sat down. It was no use reasoning with myself. I had the ineffaceable conviction that I had heard the voice. Then the first idea crossed my mind that I might be the victim of hallucinations. Yes, it must have been so, for now I recalled to mind that the voice had been that of my poor lost Julia, and at the moment I heard it, I had been dreaming of her. I questioned my own state of health. I was well, at least I had been so. I felt fully assured up to that moment. Now a feeling of chilliness and numbness and faintness had crept over me. A cold sweat was on my forehead. I tried to shake off this feeling by bringing back my thoughts to some other object. But involuntarily, as it were, I again uttered the words, "Poor Julia," aloud. At the same time, a deep and heavy sigh, almost a groan, was distinctly audible close by me. I sprang up. I was alone, quite alone. It was, once more, an hallucination. By degrees, the first painful impression wore away. Some days had passed, and I'd begun to forget my singular delusion. When my thoughts did revert to it, the recollection was dismissed as that of a ridiculous fancy. One afternoon I was in the Strand, coming from Charing Cross, when I was once more overcome by that peculiar feeling of cold and numbness which I had experienced before. The day was warm and bright and genial, and yet I positively shivered. I had scarce time to interrogate my own strange sensations when a man went by me rapidly. How was it that I recognized him at once as the individual who had only passed my window so casually on the morning of the hallucination? I don't know, and yet I was aware that this man was the tall, fair passerby of the Brompton Road. At the same moment, the voice I had previously heard whispered distinctly in my ear the words, "Follow him." I stood stupefied. The usual throngs of indifferent persons were hurrying past me in that crowded thoroughfare, but I felt convinced that not one of these had spoken to me. I remained transfixed for a moment. I was bent on a matter of business in the contrary direction to the individual I had remarked, and so, although with unsteady step, I endeavored to proceed on my way. Again that voice said, still more emphatically in my ear, "Follow him." I stopped involuntarily. And a third time, "Follow him." I told myself that the sound was a delusion, a cheat of my senses, and yet I could not resist the spell. I turned to follow him. Quickening my pace, I soon came up with the tall, fair man, and unremarked by him, I followed him. Whether this was foolish pursuit to lead me? It was useless to ask myself the question. I was impelled to follow. I was not destined to go very far, however. Before long, the object of my absurd chase entered a well-known insurance office. I stopped at the door of the establishment. I had no business within. Why should I continue to follow? Had I not already been making a sad fool of myself by my ridiculous conduct? These were my thoughts as I stood, heated by my quick walk. Yes, heated. And yet, once more came the sudden chill. Once more that same low but awful voice spoke in my ear. "Go in," it said. I endeavored to resist the spell, and yet I felt that resistance was in vain. Fortunately, as it seemed to me, the thought crossed my mind that an old acquaintance was a clerk in that same insurance office. I had not seen the fellow for a great length of time, and I never had been very intimate with him. But here was a pretext, so I went in and inquired for Clement Stanley. My acquaintance came forward. He was very busy, he said. I invented, on the spur of the moment, some excuse of the most frivolous and absurd nature, as far as I can collect, for my intrusion. "By the way," I said, as I turned to take my leave, although my question was, by the way, of nothing at all, "who was that tall, fair man who just now entered the office?" "Oh, that fellow?" was the indifferent reply. "A Captain Campbell, or Canton, or some such name. I forget what. He's gone in before the board insured his wife's life, and she's dead. Come for the settlement, I suppose." There was nothing more to be gained, so I left the office. As soon as I came without into the scorching sunlight, I gained the same feeling of cold, again the same voice. Wait! Was I going mad? More and more the conviction forced itself upon me that I was decidedly a monomaniac already. I felt my pulse. I was agitated and yet not feverish. I was determined not to give way to this absurd hallucination, and yet, so far was I out of my senses that my will was no longer my own. Resolved as I was to go, I listened to the dictates of that voice and waited. What was it to me that this Campbell, or Kenton, had insured his wife's life, that she was dead, and that he wanted a settlement of his claim? Obviously nothing, and yet I waited. So strong was the spell on me that I had no longer any count of time. I had no consciousness whether the period was long or short, that I stood there near the door, heeding of all the throng that passed, gazing on vacancy. The fiercest of policemen might have told me to move on, and I should have not stirred, in spite of all the terrors of this station. The individual came forth. He paid no heed to me. Why should he? What was I to him? This time I needed no warning voice to bid me to follow. I was a madman, and I could not resist the impulses of my madness. It was thus, at least I reasoned with myself, I followed into Regent Street. The object of my insensate observation lingered, and looked around as if in expectation. Presently a fine-looking woman, somewhat extravagantly dressed, and obviously not a lady, advanced toward him on the pavement. At the sight of her, he quickened his step and joined her rapidly. I shuddered again, but this time a sort of dread was mingled in with that strange shivering. I knew what was coming, and it came. Again that voice in my ear. "Look and remember," it said. I passed the man and woman as they stopped at their first meeting. "Is all right, George?" said the female. "All right, my girl," was the reply. I looked. An evil smile, as if of wicked triumph, was on the man's face, I thought. And on the woman's? I looked at her and I remembered. I could not be mistaken. In spite of her change in manner, dress, and appearance, it was Mary Sims. This woman, some years before, when she was still very young, had been a sort of humble companion to my mother. A simple-minded, honest girl, we thought her. Sometimes I'd fancied that she had paid me, in a sly way, a marked attention. I'd been foolish enough to be flattered by her stealthy glances and her sighs, but I'd treated these little demonstrations of partiality as due only to a silly, girlish fancy. Mary Sims, however, had come to grief in our household. She had been detected in the abstraction of sundry jewels and petty ornaments. The morning after discovery, she had left the house, and we had heard of her no more. As these recollections passed rapidly through my mind, I looked behind me. The couple had turned back. I turned to follow again, and in spite of carriages and cabs and shouts and oaths of driver, I took the middle of the street in order to pass the man and woman at a little distance unobserved. No, I was not mistaken. The woman was Mary Sims, though without any trace of all her former simple-minded airs. Mary Sims, no longer in her humble attire, but flaunting in all the finery of overdosed fashion. She wore an air of reckless joyousness on her face, and yet, in spite of that, I pitied her. It was clear she had fallen on the evil ways of better fortune. Bettered, alas, for the worse. I had an excuse now, in my own mind, for my continued pursuit, without deeming myself an utter madman. The excuse of curiosity to know the destiny of one with whom I'd been formerly familiar, and in whom I'd taken an interest. Presently the game I was hunting down stopped at the door of the Grand Café. After a little discussion, they entered. It was a public place of entertainment. There was no reason why I should not also enter. I found my way to the first floor. They were already seated at a table, Mary holding the cart in hand. They were about to dine. Why should I not dine there too? There was but one little objection. I had an engagement to dinner. But the strange impulse which overpowered me and seemed leading me on step by step, spite of myself, quickly overruled all the dictates of property toward my intended hosts. Could I not send a pettily devised apology? I glided past the couple with my head averted, seeking a table, and I was unobserved by my old acquaintance. I was too agitated to eat, but I made a semblance and little heeded the air of surprise and almost disgust on the bewildered face of the waiter as he bore away the barely touched dishes. I was in a very fever of impatience and doubt what to do next. They still sat on, in evident enjoyment of their meal and their constant draughts of sparkling wine. My impatience was becoming almost unbearable when the man at last rose. The woman seemed to have uttered some expostulation, for he turned at the door and said something harshly aloud. "Nonsense! Only one game, and I shall be back. The waiter will give you a paper, a magazine, something to while away the time." And he left the room for the billiard table, as I surmised. Now was my opportunity. After a little hesitation, I rose and planted myself abruptly on the vacant seat before the woman. "Mary," I said. She started with a little exclamation of alarm and dropped the paper she'd held. She knew me at once. "Master John!" she exclaimed, using the familiar term still given me when I was long past boyhood, and then, after a lengthened gaze, she turned away her head. I was embarrassed at first how to address her. "Mary," I said at last, "I am grieved to see you thus." "Why should you be grieved for me?" she retorted, looking at me sharply and speaking in a tone of impatient anger. "I am happy as I am." "I don't believe you," I replied. She again turned away her head. "Mary," I pursued, "can you doubt that, spite of all, I still have a strong interest in the companion of my youth?" She looked at me almost mournfully, but did not speak. At that moment, I probably grew pale, for suddenly that chilly fit seized me again, and my forehead became clammy. That voice sounded again in my ear. "Speak of him," were the words it uttered. Mary gazed on me with surprise, and yet I was assured that she had not heard that voice so plain to me. She evidently mistook the nature of my visible emotion. "Oh, Master John," she stammered, with tears gathering in her eyes, reverting again to the name of bygone times. "If you had loved me then, if you had consoled my true affection with one word of hope, one look of loving kindness, if you had not spurned and crushed me, I should not have been what I am now." I was about to make some answer to this burst of unforgotten passion when the voice came again. "Speak of him." "You have loved others since," I remarked, with a coldness which seemed cruel to myself. "You love him now," and I nodded my head toward the door by which the man had disappeared. "Do I?" she said with a bitter smile. "Perhaps. Who knows? And yet no good can come to you from a connection with that man," I pursued. "Why not? He adores me and he is free," was her answer, given with a little triumphant air. "Yes," I said, "I know he is free. He's lately lost his wife. He's made good his claim to the sum for which he insured her life." Mary grew deadly pale. "How did you learn this? What do you know of him?" she stammered. I had no reply to give. She scanned my face anxiously for some time. Then, in a low voice, she added, "What do you suspect?" I was still silent and only looked at her fixedly. "You do not speak," she pursued nervously. "Why do you not speak?" "Ah, you know more than you would say. Master John, Master John, you might set my tortured mind at rest and clear or confirm those doubts which will come into my poor head, spite of myself. Speak out. Oh, do speak out. Not here, it's impossible, I replied, looking around. The room, as the hour advanced, was becoming more thronged with guests, and the full tables gave a pretext for my reticence, when in truth I had nothing to say. Will you come and see me, will you? She asked with earnest entreaty. I nodded my head. Have you a pocketbook? I will write you my address, and you will come. Yes, I'm sure you will come, she said in an agitated way. I handed her my pocketbook and pencil, and she wrote rapidly. Between the hours of 3 and 5, she whispered, looking uneasily at the door. Be sure not to be at home. I rose. Mary held out her hand to me, then withdrew it hastily with an air of shame. The tears sprang into her eyes again. I left the room hurriedly and met her companion on the stairs. That same evening, in the solitude of my own room, I pondered over the little event of the day. I had calmed down from my state of excitement. The living apparition of Mary Sims occupied my mind almost to the exclusion of the terrors of ghostly voice which had haunted me, and my own fears coming insanity. In truth, what was that man to me? Nothing. What did his doings matter to such a perfect stranger as myself? Nothing. His connection with Mary Sims was our only link, and in what should that affect me? Nothing again. I debated with myself whether it were not foolish of me to comply with my youthful companion's request to visit her, whether it were not imprudent in me to take any further interest in the lost woman, whether there were not even danger in seeking to penetrate mysteries which were no concern of mine. The resolution to which I came pleased me, and I said aloud, No, I will not go. At the same moment came then again the voice, like an awful echo to my words. Go! It came so suddenly, and so imperatively, almost without any previous warning, as the usual shudder, that the shock was more than I could bear. I believe I fainted. I know I found myself, when I came to consciousness, in my armchair, cold and numb, and my candles had almost burned down to their sockets. The next morning I was really ill. A sort of low fever seemed to have prostrated me, and I would have willingly seized so valid a reason for disobeying, at least for that day, for some days perhaps, the injunction of that ghostly voice. But all that morning it never left me. My fearful, chilly fit was of the constant recurrence, and the words, Go, 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 were murmured so perpetually in my ears. The sound was one of such urgent entreaty that all force of will gave way completely. Had I remained in that lone room, I should have gone wholly mad. As yet, to my own feelings, I was but partially out of my senses. I dressed hastily, and I scarce know how, by no effort of my own will, it seemed to me I was in the open air. The address of Mary Sims was in a street not far from my own suburb. Without any power of reasoning, I found myself before the door of the house. I knocked and asked a slipshod girl who opened the door to me for Miss Sims. She knew no such person, held a brief, shrill colloquy with some female in the back parlor, and on coming back was about to shut the door in my face, when a voice from above, the voice of her I sought, called down the stairs, Let the gentleman come up. I was allowed to pass. In the front drawing-room I found Mary Sims. They do not know me under that name, she said with a mournful smile, and again extended, then withdrew her hand. Sit down, she went on to say, after a nervous pause. I am alone now. I adjure you, if you have still one lament feeling of old kindness for me, explain your words of yesterday to me. I muttered something to the effect that I had no explanation to give. No words could be truer. I had not the slightest conception what to say. Yes, I am sure you have. You must, you will, pursued Mary excitedly. You have some knowledge of that matter. What matter? I asked. Why, the insurance, she replied impatiently. You know well what I mean. My mind has been distracted about it. In spite of myself, terrible suspicions have forced themselves on me. No, I don't mean that, she cried, suddenly checking herself and changing her tone. Don't heed what I said. It was madness in me to say what I did. But do tell me all you know. The request was a difficult one to comply with, for I knew nothing. It's impossible to say what might have been the end of this strange interview, in which I began to feel myself an unwilling impostor. But suddenly Mary started. The noise of the latchkey in the lock, she cried, alarmed. He's returned. He must not see you. You must come another time. Here, be quick. I'll manage him. And before I could utter another word, she had pushed me into the back drawing room and closed the door. A man's step on the stairs, then voices. The man was begging Mary to come out with him, as the day was so fine. She excused herself. He would hear no refusal. At last she appeared to consent, on condition that the man would assist her to the toilet. There was a little laughter, almost hysterical on the part of Mary, whose voice evidently quivered with trepidation. Presently both mounted the upper stairs. Then the thought struck me that I'd left my hat in the front room, a sufficient cause for the woman's alarm. I opened the door cautiously, seized my hat, and was about to steal down the stairs when I was again spellbound by that numb cold. Stay, said the voice. I staggered back to the other room with my hat and closed the door. Presently the couple came down. Mary was probably relieved by discovering that my hat was no longer there and surmised I'd departed, for I heard her laughing as they went down the lower flight, and I heard them leave the house. I was alone in that back drawing room. Why? What did I want there? I was soon to learn. I felt the chill, invisible presence near me, and the voice said, Search. The room belonged to the common representative class of back drawing rooms in apartments of the better kind. Only one unfamiliar piece of furniture was an old Indian cabinet, and my eye naturally fell on that. As I stood and looked at it with a strange, uncomfortable feeling of fascination, again came the voice, Search. I shuddered and obeyed. The cabinet was firmly locked. There was no power of opening it, except by burglarious infraction, but the voice still said, Search. A thought suddenly struck me, and I turned the cabinet from its position against the wall. Behind, the woodwork had rotted and in many portions fallen away, so that the inner drawers were visible. What could my ghostly monitor mean? That I should open these drawers? I would not do such a deed of petty treachery. I turned defiantly, and addressing myself to the invisible, as if it were a living creature by my side, I cried, I must not, will not, do such an act of baseness. The voice replied, Search. I might have known that in my state of what I deemed insanity, resistance was in vain. I grasped the most accessible drawer from behind and pulled it toward me. Uppermost, within it, lay letters. They were addressed to Captain Cameron. Captain George Cameron. That name. The name of Julia's husband. The man with whom she'd eloped, for it was he who was the object of my pursuit. My shuddering fit became so strong that I could scarce hold the papers, and Search was repeated in my ear. Below the letters lay a small book in a limp black cover. I opened this book with trembling hand, and it was filled with manuscript. Julia's well-known handwriting. Read, muttered the voice. I read. There were long entries by poor Julia of her daily life. Complaints of her husband's unkindness, neglect, and cruelty. I turned to the last pages. Her hand had grown very feeble now, and she was very ill. George seems kinder now, she writes. He brings me all my medicines with his own hand. Later on, I'm dying. I know I'm dying. He's poisoned me. I saw him last night through the curtains pour something in my cup. I saw it in his evil eye. I would not drink. I will not drink no more. But I feel that I must die. These were the last words. Below were written in a man's bold hand the words, "Poor fool." This sudden revelation of poor Julia's death and dying thoughts unnerved me quite. I grew colder in my whole frame than ever. "Take it," said her voice. I took the book, pushed back the cabinet into its place against the wall, and, leaving that fearful room, stole down the stairs with trembling limbs, and left the house with all the feelings of a guilty thief. For some days I pursued my poor lost Julia's diary again and again. The whole revelation of her sad life and sudden death led but to one conclusion. She had died of poison by the hands of her unworthy husband. He had ensured her life, and then... It seemed evident to me that Harry Sims had vaguely shared suspicions of the same foul deed. On my own mind came conviction. But what could I do next? How bring this evil man to justice? What proof would be deemed to exist in those writings? I was bewildered, weak, irresolute. Like Hamlet, I shrank back and temporized. But I was not feigning madness. My madness seemed but all too real for me. During all this period, the wailing of that wretched voice in my ear was almost incessant. Oh, I must have been mad. I wandered about restlessly like the haunted thing I'd become. One day I had come, unconsciously and without purpose, into Oxford Street. My troubled thoughts were suddenly broken in upon by the solicitations of a beggar. With a heart hardened against begging impostors and under the influence of the shock rudely given by my absorbing dreams, I answered more heartily than was my wont. The man heaved a heavy sigh and sobbed forth, "That heaven help me." I caught sight of him before he turned away. He was a ghastly object, with fever in his hollowed eyes and sunken cheeks, and fever on his dry, chapped lips. But I knew, or fancied I knew, tricks of the trade, and I was obdurate. Why, I asked myself, should the cold shoulder come over me at such a moment? But it was so strong on me as to make me shiver all over. It came, that maddening voice. "Succor," it said now. I'd become so accustomed already to address the ghastly voice that I cried aloud, "Why, Julia, why?" I saw people laughing in my face at this strange cry, and I turned in the direction in which the beggar had gone. I just caught sight of him as he was tottering down a street towards Soho. I determined to have pity for this once, and followed the poor man. He led me on through I know not what streets. The steps were hurried now. In one street I lost sight of him, but I felt convinced he must have turned into a dingy court. I made inquiries, but for a time received only rude, jeering answers from the rough men and women whom I questioned. At last, a little girl informed me that I must mean the strange man who lodged in the garret of a house she pointed out to me. It was an old, dilapidated building, and I had much repugnance on entering it. But again, I was no master of my own will. I mounted some creaking stairs to the top of the house until I could go no further. A shattered door was open. I entered a wretched garret. The object of my search lay now on a bundle of rags on the bare floor. He opened his wild eyes as I approached. "I've come to succor," I said, using unconsciously the word of the voice. "What ails you?" "Ails me," gasped the man. "Hunger, starvation, fever." I was horrified. Hurrying to the top of the stairs, I shouted till I roused the attention of an old woman. I gave her money to bring me food and brandy, promising her a recompense for her trouble. "Have you no friends?" I asked the wretched man as I returned. "None," he said feebly. Then, as the fever rose in his eyes and even flushed his pallid face, he said excitedly, "I had a master once, one I periled my soul for. He knows I'm dying, but in spite of all my letters, he will not come. He wants me dead. He wants me dead, and his wish is coming to pass now." "Cannot I find him? Bring him here," I asked. The man stared at me, shook his head, and at last, as if collecting his faculties with much exertion, muttered, "Yes, it is a last hope. Perhaps you may, and I can be revenged on him at least. Yes, revenged. I've threatened him already." And the fellow laughed a wild laugh. "Control yourself," I urged, kneeling by his side. "Give me his name, his address." "Captain George Cameron," he gasped, and then fell back. "Captain George Cameron," I cried. "Speak! What of him?" But the man's senses seemed gone. He only muttered incoherently. The old woman returned with food and spirits. I'd found one honest creature in that foul region. I gave her money, provide her more if she would bring a doctor. She departed on her new errand. I raised the man's head, moistened his lips with the brandy, and then poured some of the spirit down his throat. He gulped at it eagerly and opened his eyes, but he still raved incoherently. "I did not do it. It was he. He made me buy the poison. He dared not risk the danger of it, the coward. I knew what he meant to do with it, and yet I did not speak. I was her murderer, too. Poor Mrs. Cameron. Poor Mrs. Cameron. Do you forgive me? Can you forgive?" The man screamed aloud and stretched out his arms as if to fright away a phantom. I had drunk in every word and knew the meaning of those broken accents well. Could I have found at least the means of bringing justice on the murderer's head? But the man was raving in a delirium, and I was obliged to hold him with all my strength. A step on the stairs. Could it be the medical man I'd sent for? That, indeed, would be a blessing. A man entered. It was Cameron. He came in jauntily with the words, "How now, Sanders, you rascal? What more do you want to get out of me?" He started at the sight of the stranger. I rose from my kneeling posture like an accusing spirit. I struggled for calm, but passion beyond my control mastered me, and was I not a madman? I seized him by the throat with more words. "Murderer! Poisoner! Where's Julia?" He shook me off violently. "And who the devil are you, sir?" he cried. "That murdered woman's cousin." I rushed at him again. "Lying hound," he shouted and grappled me. His strength was far beyond mine. He had his hand on my throat. A crimson darkness was in my eyes. I could not see. I could not hear. There was a torrent of sound pouring in my ears. Suddenly his grasp relaxed. When I recovered my sight, I saw the murderer struggling with the fever-stricken man who had risen from the floor and seized him from behind. This unexpected diversion saved my life, but the ex-groom was soon thrown back on the ground. "Captain George Cameron," I cried, "kill me, but you will only heap another murder on your head." He advanced toward me with something glittering in his hand. Without a word, he came and stabbed at me, but at that same moment I darted at him a heavy blow. What followed was too confused for clear remembrance. I will say I fancied that I saw, the dim form of Julia Stanton standing between me and her vile husband. Did he see the vision too? I cannot say. He reeled back and fell heavily to the floor. Maybe it was only my blow that felled him. Then came confusion. A dream of a crowd of people, policemen, muttered accusations. I had fainted from the wound in my arm. Captain George Cameron was arrested. Saunders recovered and lived long enough to be the principal witness on his trial. The murderer was found guilty. Poor Julia's diary, too, which I had abstracted, told fearfully against him. But he contrived to escape the gallows. He had managed to conceal poison on his person, and he was found dead in his cell. Mary Sims I never saw again. I once received a little scrawl. I'm at peace now, Master John. God bless you. I've had no more hallucinations since that time. The voice has never come again. I found out poor Julia's grave, and as I stood and wept by its side, the cold shoulder came over me for the last time. Who shall tell me whether I was once really mad, or whether I was not?
One. Shad Hankins pushed the tavern's shutters open and stepped through, leaving them swinging behind as he stopped just inside. His dirty off-white canvas riding coat hung nearly to the floor, dripping rainwater from the cold, wet storm he had been riding in. While his eyes adjusted to the darker interior of the room, the shadow cast across his face from the large-brimmed hat pulled low over his brow kept his harsh anger held hidden in the black. A catchy tune of a familiar song willowing out across the room did little to squelch the fiery heat in his soul. He saw the bastard, though, through the dust and smoke that hovered above those sitting at the tables, cards in hand, guns lying beside their chips. There at the bar sat the son of a bitch that shattered his world. Oh, my exes live in Texas. The steel guitar whined as the piano plinked out a melodic chorus. The keys on the player piano dipped and rose quickly in a mad dance from left to right, back and forth, invisible as a ghost's hands appearing to plunk them to the tune of the repetitive song. After gaining better focus and surveying the lay of the room's interior, Shad took account of how many of Frank's men were there and what positions they stood or sat. 2 at the bar, 1 on either side of Frank. A group of 5 sat around a table to the left, where poker cards and small piles of bills and coins lay scattered amongst the whiskey glasses. 2 more stood to the right in shadows several steps to Shad's right-hand side. And of course, on the floor at Frank's feet lay Clyde, Frank's tired old American bulldog warning him of impending danger in a low methodic growl rising slightly in volume when their eyes locked. An aging short-haired dog with yellowed long fangs and skin stretched drooping down around him on the floor. Not much of a threat these days as he had once been. He and Clyde never liked one another, even though Shad was a friend of the canine members of this world. The song continued. Oh, my exes live in Texas. Frank cleared his throat before beginning to slowly turn. Funny, I can always smell your stench before I see you, Shadley. Apparently Clyde can too. Of course, he being a dog. His long, thick mustache attempted to hide the gritty smile widening enough to show his rotting teeth. Your sweet little Anne-Marie sure had a pretty face. I was doing the dirty deed to her a couple hours ago. I kinda doubt you've ever seen it, though. Not being able to satisfy that deep of an itch I was scratching. His grin widened even more, knowing how much Shad loved her. Clyde cocked his head back and forth as if to ask Shad, "What you gonna do now, partner?" The tune continued to play. Oh, my exes. The keys on the player piano still danced from fingers invisible to plunking them to the swing beat of George Strait's tune. Shadley Gerald Hankins' left eye twitched at the nasty comment spat from Frank's foul mouth. I reckon I know where I'll be heading after I'm finished here. Shame you felt the need to taint such a pretty thing as Anne-Marie. Frank's sidekicks spun their backs to the bar as each dropped a hand to their pistol grips dangling from their sides. Shad saw the two in the shadows make movement toward their holsters as well, as hands began to drop below the poker table to his left. He had shown his cards and they knew his play now. Their slight movements of aggression enacted a mental chain reaction from Shad in a mere flash of a millisecond. Once triggered, it began a mechanical action which could not be undone or reversed. The keys on the piano stopped on cue when Shad's hands both maneuvered across his front, left hand clasping the pistol grip facing backwards on his right and vice versa with his opposite hand. The action came quick and quiet until the silence was loudly shattered. A thunderous crack followed by another came seconds before sending the two men sitting on either side of Frank tumbling backwards against the bar top. Before they had time to hit the ground, Shad pulled his right hand in an arc as he pulled the trigger of his Colt 45 twice, causing a blur of stumbled motion bouncing against the wall, ending in a tangled pile of the two men gasping to refill their lungs with air as they lay coughing and sputtering in growing pools of blood. The snappy tune restarted and continued to fill the background through the chaos-filled room. Like the fluid action of a pocket watch's gears and springs, Shad's left hand swung over to the poker table in a riddle of loud bangs from the click of the trigger, causing each man to fall backwards from their chairs and landing them sprawled to the floor in agonizing groans and splatters of red liquid. Thick smoke filled the room along with the scent of spent sulfury gunpowder. Shad pulled his dominant hand, gripping his second silver revolver back at Frank, its warm barrel drawing a bead on the dirty fucker's forehead of the man that defiled his wife, Anne-Marie. "I take pleasure in killing you, Frank." And before Frank's expression had a chance to react, a loud bang rang out in a thunderous pop as a dark red spot instantly appeared dead center above his nose. He stood like a statue for several seconds as if his brain were attempting to conceive what just happened. And then, like a curtain being drawn closed, the lights went out without ado, and he fell backwards from his stool against the bar, tumbling onto the dead men that seconds ago were sitting on either side sharing a bottle of cheap house whiskey. The entire human content of the room was either dead or dying on the floor, with nary a soul left standing except for himself and the barkeep, whose head slowly rose from beneath the bar's top, hands shaking above his head, waving a white napkin in surrender. As if scripted in a theatrical playwright, the piano restarted the song back up from the beginning, and the sound of the steel guitar whined out as the violin lulled the way for the opening vocals. "All my exes live in Texas." "Could somebody please kill that fucking insidious song?" A loud crack instantly rang out, and the player piano's tune slowly wound down to a dying whirl and a garbled, groggy death. Silence swallowed the last groans and gasps of the dying bodies laid out in blood-soaked piles of dirt and dull red carnage. Shad glanced over at the bartender as if expecting a thank you for executing the piano, the same as he had just done to the bar's customers. "You dumb asshole, it's me talking to you." Shad slowly twisted his stance and peered down to the aged mutt, who had not stirred a single muscle from where he was lying when he first walked into the bar through the swinging doors. "You should see the idiotic fucking look on your face, Shad. It's quite comical," Clyde continued. "Yeah, go ahead and say it. I hear it all the damn time. You're just a dog. You can't talk." His sloppy lips flopped and drool rolled out with his words. "Well, guess what? You'd be wrong as hell if you did say it, 'cause it's sure as shit me talking." Clyde's head lifted, followed by the slow action upward leading into a long, arduous stretch, morphing into the full upright position. "Guess you're the one responsible for feeding me now, being's how you just killed my fucking meal ticket and best damn friend in the world, even though Frank was too fucking dense to carry on much of a conversation." His nose shot snot from its holes as he snorted a gravelly canine laugh. Shad's eyes stared with hesitation, but trailed his left hand to the right, drawing the hammer back before stopping it in a dead aim at the tired dog's forehead. "You have a foul mouth for a lower life form. Say another word, you dumbass mutt, and the bar behind you will be wearing your insides, shit, bones, blood, and your last damned meal." He then turned to the barkeep. "Whiskey, straight up, and make it the good stuff, none of that rock gut house crap Frank drinks. I have higher standards." He walked forward and bent down, slipping his hand into Frank's vest. Reaching into his inside pocket, he retrieved a long, thin leather wallet. "You won't be needing this, asshole." Shad spoke to Frank's lifeless body. Clyde's eyes followed Shad's movements as he walked back over and pulled a couple of paper bills from his previous master and laid them on the bar. After Shad eyed the dusty bottle of light tan liquid that the bartender sat on the table, he poured it into what appeared to be a dirty shot glass and began to speak an odd toast or creed. Here's to the wives you diddled and the whiskey you drank, the songs that were fiddled, the money stole from my bank. I raise this piss-poor drink to the bright blue sky in this joy-filled memory of the day you died. Shad paused and swallowed down the bitter shot, enduring the burn in his throat before slamming the empty glass back onto the bar. Fuck you, Frank, and the horse you rode in on. He then turned and without another word headed back towards the swinging shutters. Just before he crossed the threshold of where the saloon ended and the boardwalk began, he turned to the black and white bulldog sitting beside his master's cooling body, as rigor mortis had already gone to work stiffening the carcass. The storm subsided as the sun shined a brilliant beam into the otherwise dim-lit saloon that highlighted the comical-looking dog as he tilted his head, ears perked, yet flopped in the middle. He looked like a mix between a spotted Holstein cow and round-bellied pig. So funny-looking, it caused Shad to laugh out loud. He cleared his dry throat that had just been scorched by the whiskey. Shad spat towards the tarnished brass spittoon nestled against the bar. A tiny thud pinged as he hit the opening. You coming with, Clyde? Ain't nothing here for you anymore. Want to watch him die again? He grinned. As Shad's leg crossed over to the boardwalk, Clyde's chubby body shot through behind him just in time. Nothing left but the sound of the shutter's squeaky hinges' movement back and forth as the tune started back up. Again. Oh, my exes living. 2. Sirens loudly blared as the door slammed closed with a bang. It sounded like a shot fired. Clyde panted as his stubby legs attempted to keep up with Shad's long strides down the sidewalk, the sound of his long jacket swooshing as his legs kept pushing forward. Hey, Shad, you have a plan to maybe slow down? Maybe, He sucked deep in between pants and endeavors to fill his lungs with much-needed oxygen. Come on, Shad, a short-legged and full-bodied physique like mine needs a break. Maybe a dog treat or two to prop me along. Even that ass-bag Frank used to. Shad stopped abruptly and spun his feet on a dime. Literally. He looked down to the sidewalk, and there at the tip of his square-toed boot sat a shiny face of Franklin D. Roosevelt staring up at him. He turned his attention to Clyde. I didn't bring you along for your conversation or your complaints. You're free to either shut the hell up and follow like a poodle, or you can go find a bitch in heat and see what that does for you. Makes no difference to me, Clyde. The only promise I'll make is that you'll be able to watch Frank die. Again. Shad spun back around, ignoring the Roosevelt's plea to pick him up and pocket him along with any other jingle-jangle coins in Shad's pocket. Clyde sat and watched Shad return to his purpose-driven stride down the sidewalk, his ears folded in that inquisitive, bent-in-the-middle perk that previously drew a grin across Shad's somber face. Clyde stood up and shuffled over to the shiny dime on the sidewalk. He sniffed at it a moment or two before stepping a half-step forward and then hiking his right leg and sprinkling urine over a small spot, missing Roosevelt's tiny face with poor aim. Satisfied he marked it well enough, Clyde sped his pace up to a trot, working at catching up to his new master, hoping food and rest were next on the agenda. As soon as Clyde came within a few footsteps behind Shad, the two made a hard right at the corner and Shad stopped abruptly. Clyde, unable to slow his trot quick enough, bumped his head into Shad's leg. It was in that moment he noticed Shad's attire was completely different. He looked up and down, clearly exploring Shad's new wardrobe change. When had he had time for an outfit change? He wondered. He looked himself over as well as he could. His fat head had clearly no neck, leaving his ability to see much past his portly chest and belly nearly impossible. He knew he had hind legs behind him, but damned if he could actually see them. Unless he was on his side licking his junk. He looked around at the brick-lined sidewalk. Nope, Not soft enough to lay down for a good cleaning here, he thought to himself. Besides, he had seen enough to know he was still sporting the same black-spotted white undercoat as always. No fashion change for him. When did you change, Shad? By the way, you look good in black pinstripes. Way better than that drugstore cowboy look you was sporting before. That double-breasted jacket really rocks your deep inset eyes. Scary as hell, in fact. Shad turned and asked Clyde a question. Do you remember the Oasis bar? Clyde looked up at Shad's face and instantly saw the familiar sign that was brightly lit in red neon letters that read, The Oasis, surrounded by a green neon out-of-round circle that flashed on and off. Yeah, I've been there. Why? Did Frank sit at the bar like in the saloon? Clyde's ears perked again in crumpled fashion. Let me think. His head tilted back and forth and then back again, mocking a curious puppy in the window of a pet store, attempting a cuteness to attract a taker. Enough with the bullshit, Clyde. Where would Frank be inside? Where's his usual? Clyde's tongue flopped from his mouth before he licked his lips and responded. We gonna get a steak in there? They're mighty tasty. Frank, god damn it. Where does he sit? How many goons around him? Round table at the very back, left side from the door. Maybe 5 or 6 gun-toting slingers spread out and around in front. Won't be nobody else near him unless he's in the middle of a meet. Clyde couldn't help but continue off subject. Oh, meat. That reminds me of the New York strip they have. He licked his lips again as his stomach gurgled a sloppy belch up from the depths of his now starving pipeworks. Delicious. We gonna get one? Shad opened his double-breasted jacket and pulled out his Thompson M1928 Tommy gun, commonly known as a Chicago typewriter. The round C-drum magazine held 100 rounds. Plenty of tools to paint the walls red and get his vengeance from Frank, the son of a bitch that slept with his wife. He'd take pleasure in killing him again. He'd follow him through time after time as long as it took, chasing that bastard that deflowered the woman and only thing he ever loved. It had become his one and only pleasure in life now that she was gone. He pulled the lever on the right side, charging around into the chamber with a snap. He let it swing back under his coat, the sling nestling it close to his body and easy to access. Stay behind me, Clyde, but you'd best lock your jaws on the calf of any SOB that I miss and draws a bead on me. You got that? It'll be the difference between enjoying a big old steak or becoming one, Shad said with a serious firmness in his tone. You got it, boss. Frank treated me like shit anyway. Happy to oblige. Shad swore he could almost see the image of KC's strips floating in Clyde's pupils. He continued to push through the crowd and cross the threshold from the outside in. His eyes scanned immediately to the left as he focused his vision through the smoke-filled room. Poker tables spotlighted, brimmed hats covering the players' eyes as cigar smoke rolled up from the ashtrays and mouths of patrons puffing away. It stunk. It smelled of arrogance and greed. Shad detested everything about bars, with the exception of the aroma and flavor of a good whiskey. Okay, any whiskey. It was the burn felt deep in his throat that drove him to drink, the reminder that he wasn't there to protect Anne-Marie in her time of need. The moment abruptly changed when the all-too-obtrusive song began once more, the one he knew too well, the song that set the mood for killing. Good old George Strait's tune about Texas and Tennessee and all the women in between. The steel guitar rang out odd in this gangster's nest that he had pushed his way into. He wondered if Frank had become accustomed to dying every time the familiar tune began. It didn't matter. Frank's body would soon become riddled with holes like Swiss cheese. It was inevitable. Revenge wins over rape every time. Kind of an endless love sort of thing. Shad's heart warmed from normal chill it held with the thought. His eyes still actively alert and looking for the dark, cruel eyes that belonged to his nemesis. He briefly wondered if it had been worth it to Frank. Those few minutes of invading his wife's pleasure spot while she surely wrestled to be free from his nasty invasive penetration. Would he have perpetrated the crime had he known he'd pay for it over and over again through eternity? 1 second of stolen pleasure traded for a lifetime of being hunted down like a wild animal and murdered. Each encounter ending riddled with bullet holes and left cold on the floor in a splatter of red goo, only to be replayed in a different era of time, over and over again like a movie reel looped in a continuous circle. Shad spied his target and quickened his walk through the crowd as his hands moved to his weapon swinging behind his jacket. His heart rate never elevated. Pulse remained steady and calm. He was now a fine-tuned and well-practiced killer with trained muscle memory to punch his targets without fail. He moved like a finely tuned, oiled mechanical mechanism. It was almost as if Shad no longer felt the pleasure of the kill anymore, the hunt almost becoming mundane. It was more like a job now, punching in at the time clock, working on the production line of retribution in the form of murder. Clyde's short, stocky legs moved double time with a swish, swish sound, attempting to keep up. He wanted that fucking steak Shad had promised if he succeeded. His round belly rolled left and then right in cadence with his fancy footwork, burning calories he didn't feel he could spend. Steak, pant, juicy meat, was all he could think about as his glands oozed saliva onto his outer jowls before flying off and splattering sticky drops of slime dripping down every surface it hit. "How my exes living," the music repeated on an endless spooled loop. Shad didn't even hear it anymore. It played loudly, yet his ears rarely heard its musical notes or vocalized lyrics. Too focused on the mission. Locate Frank and eliminate him. If a timer had been started from the moment Shad crossed the establishment's threshold, it would have read less than 35 seconds until Shad and Frank's eyes locked. Add 15 seconds filled with multiple bursts of .45 caliber rounds popping along with the muffled moans and groans of bodies catching lead and falling in clumps across the floor, out of chairs and across tables being overturned, and you would have less than 50 seconds before a cloud of spent gunpowder leaves the stench of sulfur and smoke. Frank's mouth spoke nary a word before his evening ended with empty eyes devoid of any life. A scattered pile of bodies laid out in abstract painted pools of red, slowly filling the open floor between the motionless clumps of silent death. Clyde trotted around the assorted mayhem, stopping and sniffing before moving on to the next. When he finally reached Frank's body, Clyde shoved his muzzle into his chest, and the snorts and sniffs quietly echoed out and spread through the fog. He stepped forward and abruptly stopped for a brief moment, backing up and then sidestepping before his right leg lifted out at an angle that gave him perfect aim for his urine to mark his spot on Frank's chin. He looked back at Shad, his mouth spreading into a smile that allowed his snaggletooth to be seen. "What? Never seen a canine marked territory before?" His nose went back to the ground briefly, followed by another quick sniff. His short neck stretched enough to allow his fat head to peer back up at Shad. "Smells like KC strip coming my way, don't it?" He trotted back over and sat next to where Shad stood surveying the now quiet scene. He walked up to where Frank's body lay, and he lifted the Tommy gun's muzzle to Frank's forehead. A quick 2 or 3 round burst ensured that he had completed the task he had come for. "Was it worth it, Frank?" Shad guffawed. "I loved her, you son of a bitch. She had value to me. What was she to you? Another notch on your belt?" Shad shook his head and glanced back out across the room. Heads ducked behind game tables and back around corners as the gun's muzzle painted the area he scanned. Frightened sighs and cautioned breaths could be heard from the now placid scene, just before he turned to walk back across the threshold and on to the next portal. He looked down at Frank and said, "See you in the future, Frank." And then he walked away. "Casey Strip," Clyde bellowed out. "Who's stopping you, boy?" Shad replied. "I got another decade to do." "You lying son of a..." Shad turned slowly around and lifted his Chicago typewriter up, checked the drum, magazine, and slowly leveled it at Clyde. "Problem, Clyde?" He paused to about a 5 count. "Didn't think so." Shad's patent leather shoes clicked across the tiled floor to an odd tune as he stepped over bodies toward the front entryway. Hidden eyes peered at him from darkened corners and from under tabletops that held scattered poker hands and chips, surrounded by empty and overturned chairs from quick exits into hiding when the chaos began. That damn repetitive steel guitar and violin tune droned on again as Shad's heel made the click from tile to the thud of the bricked sidewalk that led into the night. 4 paws jumped through the threshold just in time, and the neon sign's bright colors reflected the flashing glow onto the damp street and white undercoat of Clyde's furry ass as he waddled behind Shad's dark silhouette, disappearing into the shadows of the night. Oh, my exes live in Texas. Shad looked back to see Clyde's disgusted sneer across his flopping jowls as he appeared to double-time his trot to catch up. Oh, he's in again with that incessant damn song. Is it on your last frickin' nerve too, Clyde? I swear I'd shoot every god-danged jukebox that I crossed paths with if I figured it would do anything. Clyde looked up. What the hell you talking about, Shadley? I haven't heard shit since you've been blasting every damn kind of gun at every damn outlaw you claim wronged your mean old ass. He trotted up beside him. Seriously, all I pick up is a damn ringing in my ears. He started whistling the familiar tune. Shad looked down. I knew you were a liar, Clyde. I ought to shave your ass bald and call you Rat. 3. Shad and Clyde continued to walk down the sidewalk. The scenery looked practically the same with the exception of more aerodynamic lines on the automobiles. Shad stopped in his tracks. His face appeared to change from one of determination to one painted with relief. Ah, he sighed. Maybe the end is near. A smile slowly transformed from cheek to cheek. You hear that, Clyde? What? I don't hear a damn thing. Exactly. No George Strait. Wonder what it means. Maybe this hellish journey is close to ending. It's like it's not even fun anymore. What's that mean? You ain't gonna desert me, are you? I mean, you can't keep killing my master Frank and then just up and disappear on me, can you? Will you? He asked with sad worry in his droopy eyes that appeared to ooze real tears instead of just eye boogers sliding out from the corners. Do you really think I know what the hell is going on or when it's all going to cease existence? I'm almost looking forward to being alone again. That's just damned hurtful, Shad. And just when I was beginning to get used to your smell. Shad looked over and sneered with a grimace as he pulled his red jacket back to see what weapon he was sent with this time. Well, I'll be jiggered. A Remington 870 side boulder tactical with extended shell tube, 6+1. Sweet. That ought to paint the wall red with pieces of that fornicating Frank. I assume this means here we go again. You know what to do when you assume, don't you? Yeah. You've informed me before, teacher. I don't mind making an ass out of you, though, he guffawed. I'm still waiting on that steak you promised, which already makes an ass out of me. In due time, Clyde. Due time. So you ain't forgotten or lying? Clyde smacked his lips as his jowls pushed air out from underneath them. Come on, let's do this again. Shad closed his jacket and pushed through the doorway of the club. His eyes intently scanned the surroundings. It took only seconds before he spotted the all-too-familiar face in the crowd. Having grown tired of the never-ending ritual of spotting Frank's cohorts and quickly planning which to take out first, he felt as if there was no mistake that could change his fate. So instead, he opened his jacket and unfolded the stock on his shotgun. He bumped around into its chamber and fired into the ceiling, sending debris falling all around as pellets scattered out in a tight pattern into the light fixture above. The crowd began running as the lights flickered and pieces of the chandelier falling sent some diving for cover underneath tables. The screams swelled as the crowd quickly thinned, leaving only 6 or 7 men dressed in dark clothing and reaching for what Shad assumed were weapons. And there Frank sat at the bar, as usual, his hand reaching for his whiskey. Neat. "Shadley Gerald Hankins," he stated as he pulled the glass towards him before lifting it up while turning in his stool to face his opponent. "Don't we ever grow tired of this endless game we play?" He took a sip of the caramel-colored drink and then sucked air as if the burn in his mouth and throat needed cooled by a smooth wisp of breath. Shad looked around at the other men who had already drawn weapons and held them aimed at his head, awaiting his misguided move or Frank's word to erase the problem within their sights. "It appears, Shad, that you should have thought this one out a little more thoroughly. Winning can become so repetitive that we eventually lose the ability to believe we can, indeed, lose. Your thoughts on this subject?" "Maybe, just maybe, I've become so knackered of spilling your blood in every goddamn level of play that I decided to give you a sporting chance this time. The muscle memory of killing you so easily has brought me to a point I no longer look forward to it anymore." Frank swilled down the remainder of his whiskey and then slammed it on the bar top. "Something about you, Shad, has always chapped my ass. I guess it's why I enjoyed banging your sweet little Miss Anne-Marie. The way she squealed still plays over and over in my mind." His grin widened, showing his yellow teeth. "I swear I cut her throat too quickly. I should have given her another go-round before helping her depart this cold and cruel world." Shad found it difficult to keep his anger in at hearing how Frank had assaulted his wife and then killing her too soon before satisfying himself again. His blood began to boil. His hand started to shake for the first time ever. "Oh, boys, looky. Shad's beginning to shake in his boots." He returned his stare back across the hushed room until his eyes locked onto Shad's. "Boo frickin' fucking who. I'm so sorry to see you upset at knowing your wife was finally satisfied in her lady parts by a man who knows the inner workings so well of a woman of the night. That's what she was, Shadley. Nothing but a two-bit whore who begged for more right down to her bitter end." Shad lifted his Remington and in one fluid motion pumped its grip, charging another shell into the chamber and firing across the room at Frank. Pellets fell short from the distance and merely grazed his head and body, but failed to drop him in his tracks. Frank drew his hand to his face and swiped it across his forehead, and then pulled it away to see red. Shad pumped another shell into the shotgun's chamber, simultaneously to Frank's quickly calling out orders to his boys. "Nail his fucking ass!" Shad's body jerked and twisted in a death dance as multiple rounds hit him from about every direction in the room. Frank watched in what surely felt like slow motion as Shad's jacket became riddled with holes and stains of a darker crimson red mixed with the red fabric of what he wore. He tumbled and stumbled to the ground at Clyde's trembling paws. Shad's eyes found Clyde's and they stared blankly at each other for a moment. A stream of blood began to flow from the corner of Shad's lip, his eyes becoming fogged over in a slow blur. I'm sorry to leave you before I got you that steak, Clyde." Frank slowly stepped from his stool and meandered over to where his nemesis now quietly lay. Shad's eyes rolled up to see Frank's silhouette above him, his pistol pointed at his head. He couldn't make himself utter even a single word. "Cat got your tongue, Shad? It's okay. I got 2 little bullets here, one for you," and he pulled the trigger, ending Shad's rule over himself and the game. He then moved the smoking barrel over to Clyde's wide forehead, right to the spot where the black point of the black fur broke through the white at the bridge of his wet nose, giving him the perfect target. "And one for you, you fat fucking traitor and shit example of a man's best friend." He pulled the trigger once more, ending with the faint sound of a short-lived yelp. He looked up at his unharmed gang. "Well, that's the way the cook crumbles, boys. Game over and done. 4. The masked doctor leaned over the patient who was strapped to the gurney. He pulled his mask down and called out the time of death. His yellowed teeth became visible as he called out, 10:32 p.m., Nurse Anne-Marie. Mark it in the books. Yes, sir, Dr. Frank, 10:32 p.m. She began to pull the sheet over his head. Do you think he saw coming? I mean, his eyes seemed to stare so intently into mine, as if he knew me or something. It's hard to tell, Anne-Marie. We tried our best to revive him, but it was like his soul refused to accept the electroshock or the epinephrine. His heart just refused to restart, as if it were just too broken. Sometimes it's just game over, no matter what we do. His eyes dropped down to Anne-Marie's scrubs and the way they fit so tightly, outlining her heart-shaped ass. His grin revealed an even wider exposure of his nasty teeth. Nurse Anne-Marie turned just in time to catch the doctor's stare that felt as if it would penetrate her pants with an unwanted invasion that instantly made her feel dirty and violated. In a game room tucked away in the farthest, darkest corner of a back room in a small-town bowling alley sat an electronic game with a teenager's attention fixated on playing, dueling the game's evil nemesis in a new level of difficulty. Tommy had become obsessed with beating the game Infinite Kill, an older video-based game created by Francovision. The virtual first-person shooter-style console game had been retired several years ago from the mainstream as technology and visual graphic enhancements became more and more lifelike. The game's violence and depiction had come under fire and questioned from parents along with public concern groups who focused on the effects of such graphic violence on the nation's youth. Tommy's initials had replaced every high-score spot on the console's leaderboard except for the number 1 position. His parents bowled in a league every Wednesday night, allowing Tommy the unsupervised time for his gameplay. He loved the battle between good and evil. The major difference between this game and others at the time of release was the ability for the player to choose who to be: the good guy who was wronged, Shadley Gerald Hankins, or the evil wrongdoer, only known as Frank, along with his sidekick Clyde, an American bulldog. Tommy always chose to be Frank, the evil nemesis who raped and killed Shad's wife. He fed another dollar bill into the console's reader. The time on the wall clock showed him it was 9:17 p.m. as the bill reader sucked in his dollar to the machine's interior bank. George Strait's famous song, All My Exes Live in Texas, began with the whine of a steel guitar, country fiddle, and tingy piano playing. Tommy's concentration was intense. He had heard the bowling alley's owner was soon returning Infinite Kill back to the game distributor. If he was going to hold the entire gambit of winning slots, he needed to win the game tonight. There would be no other chance. The thought of failing drove his desire beyond anything else he had ever attempted. He battled his way up through the levels with speed and accuracy, never missing a beat. His score was so close to the winning spot on the leaderboard after little more than an hour and 10 minutes. His best time so far without dying, as he had so many other times. He had already taken the first 8 spots below the highest ranking. The rumble of screams, yelling, and gunfire loudly raged from the console's speakers as Tommy worked the mounted plastic weapons toward the screen as the repetitive but catchy song continued to drone on in the background. All my exes live in Texas. At precisely 10:29 p.m., with only 31 minutes left until the bowling alley's closing time and final attempt to set the record, the screams from Tommy's mouth loudly echoed out from the game room, spilling into the bowling alley. Spectators and bowlers alike rushed the amusement game room to see what the ruckus was. Tommy was now on the last level programmed into the game's memory. This was the moment he had worked so hard to get to. Shad fired his shotgun into the air and a hush quickly fell over the screen in the room he stood facing the Francovision game's likely final play. As Tommy directed his character, Frank, calmly over to Shadley's dying body now lying next to Clyde, he delivered the final 2 shots, bringing all the lights to flash while buzzers and bells sounded loudly over the George Strait tune. Tommy typed his initials into the number 1 spot. T.I.M. Tommy Israel Mitchell, and turned to face the hoops, hollers, and applause. His mom and dad had heard all the hoopla and turned to witness the alleys empty out towards the room that held the pinball machines and video games in the back of the building, so they followed. They pushed their way through the crowd of spectators still clapping, wondering if it was somehow their son was at the center of. His mom's growing concern as they came closer to the game was correct. Tommy was at the game she had forbid him from playing after catching him several weeks earlier. She had watched long enough to realize that this was the game at the media's focal point several years back. Tommy, that game is an affront on the lack of value placed on women, and the graphic violence displayed is abhorrent. You most certainly will not be playing a game like that. She had made her feelings very clear on the subject. But as the people parted like Moses at the Red Sea, her son had apparently ignored her demands, and now he had gained local fame for apparently beating the game. Upon further exploration of the matter, she also realized he had been playing the part of the bad guy, Frank, who had perpetrated the horrible violence against the better character's wife. She looked over at her husband and quickly noticed his bold display of pride with his son's accomplishment over the game. She shook her head and turned, feeling every bit as defeated as Shadley was. Disgusted with her son, her husband, and the whole damned place, she pushed her way through all the building's patrons and walked out into the quiet of the parking lot. The only sound she could hear was a vaguely familiar tune spilling out into the parking lot. "Oh, my exes live in Texas." She hummed the tune inside her head and then finished by singing, "In Tennessee."
From the office of Robert Floyd, M.D. Subject, patient file. Johnston, Stephen. 0104012. Gerald. Here's the transcript of my initial examination of Stephen Johnston after his arrest. I'll make sure the rest of his file gets to you before his transfer. I want you to draw your own conclusions, so I won't say much here, but I have some notes after the transcript. As requested, I've only transcribed Stephen's statements. They are as follows. Late night TV, infomercials, phone sex lines. God, they were awful. Like those pop-ups you used to get online before you could just block them all. I guess there will always be hot singles in your area, right, Doc? Tech changes, but the libido stays the same. There are kids alive right now who will never know what it was like to have a grand total of 3 channels. And even if you had cable, it didn't matter. Man, if you were unlucky enough to be awake between midnight and 5 in the morning, your TV options were limited. You remember Jack Cave? I used to watch it all the time when I was a kid. It was one of those syndicated shows, you know, the kind that you were never sure what channel it would be on. You just run across it by accident at like 2 in the afternoon on a Sunday, or 2 in the morning, remember? Jack Cave was always on an adventure somewhere tropical. He was like a spy for hire. Always a different beautiful girl every week. Huge explosions. No? That's crazy. I think I eventually saw all of them, but with those shows you never knew. And if you saw part 1 of a 2-parter, forget it. You were never going to see part 2. Sorry. Yeah, okay. I'll get to it. So it was right after midnight, and I was propped up on my couch. Couldn't sleep. All congested and coughing. Hot 1 minute, freezing the next. Normal flu stuff. I took something for it, but it didn't help much. 2 night times would normally do the job, but not that night. The flu was kicking my ass hard that night. Besides, my wife was out of town for work, and I can't sleep for shit if she's not home. She offered to stay with me, but I urged her to go. I've always been the kind of guy that believes in keeping to your commitments. Anyway, so I'm sitting up and scrolling through the guide. The only sound is the tick-tick-tick of me thumbing the button. There were some movies I could have watched, but I still had hope that I would fall asleep, and I didn't want to start a movie I might sleep through. So eventually I run across NBG, and I turn it on, as much for background noise as for anything else. What? NBG? Oh, nothing but games. The network that's nothing but reruns of old game shows. I mean, they produce some new ones as well, but after 11, it's all oldies. Cloud 9 was just starting. Ever see it? It ran into 50s, but I don't think it lasted but a few years. Well, it was before my time, but I remember watching reruns with my grandma when I was little. Doesn't matter. That's what was on. They had the raised platforms, 4 on one side of the stage and 4 on the other, all trimmed with cotton or something to make them look like clouds. And in the middle, taller than the rest, was Cloud 9. The contestants would have to do challenges or answer questions on each of the 4 platforms on their side and be the first to get to the middle platform. Does that ring a bell? Guess not, huh? Well, you're kind of young anyway. No, I'm fine, just trying to keep it all straight in my head. Let's keep going. The music started, that silly high-energy music that sounds like it's all brass and horns. Then the camera does that sweeping kind of shot past the sign. The word cloud is cursive and made up all fluffy, and 9 is in all caps, trimmed with flashing lights. You know, to this day, I still have no idea what colors were on that sign. I've never seen it in anything other than black and white. Dick Kennett walks out from behind the curtain, waving and smiling, immaculate slicked hair and crisp suit. Everybody in the audience clapping, women yelling and shouting his name. Women loved Dick Kennett. Hell, my own mother loved him. She used to joke about leaving my father for Dick. The applause was starting to die down, and Dick took his usual place behind the podium. Hello again, everyone. I'm Dick Kennett, and welcome to Cloud 9, where the goal is to climb your way to happiness, the audience screamed. You know, Dick would always trail that part off and then let them answer. I know a lot of hosts have done it since then, but I think he started it. I'm not real sure, but Dick had a voice as smooth as warm butter. He keeps going. Exactly, my friends. Now let's welcome our first contestant. He's a cook and loves to get busy in the kitchen. All the way from Sweet 19, it's Jim Connor. The name sounded familiar, but come on, it's not uncommon. The audience booed. The curtain opened just enough and Jim was shoved out onto the stage. He was completely nude, and even without color, I could see the blood that was running from his hair. Bruises showed up fine, too. His wrists were tied together in front of him with what looked like a twisted coat hanger. And he was using his hands to cover, his genitals. He had a bit of a paunch, and on his ribs were dark bruises. He'd been worked over pretty good and was crying and carrying on. "What is this?" he says, squinting up at the bright lights. "Where am I?" Dick laughs that laugh of his along with the studio audience. "Why, you're on Cloud 9. The camera pans around and the audience goes nuts. This one guy, suit and all, like he was going to church, he was sitting near the aisle. He laughed so hard that blood spewed from his mouth and nose. Just erupted. He fell over into the aisle, still laughing and convulsing. The people in front of him are rubbing the blood everywhere, over their arms and faces. One woman began to lick it off her little girl's face, like a lioness cleaning her cub on a nature documentary. I froze, just trying to figure it out, process it. Was I dehydrated, or was I so feverish that I started hallucinating? Or was I just crazy? I wish I had an answer. Dick fixed his gaze back on Jim. Now, Jim, let's go over the rules, shall we? You must complete one challenge or answer one question per cloud to make your way to the top. If you get there before your opponent, you win. Fuck you, Jim said and spat blood onto the floor. He went from scared to pissed fast. Can't say that I blame him. If I was naked and looked like I'd been hit by a car, I'd be pissed too. Oh, Jimmy, that little outburst is going to cost you. Dick motioned to somebody off stage. You've given your opponent an advantage. Now, let's get a volunteer from the audience. The audience loses it. People are pushing each other out of the way, their hands high in the air. Fights broke out between grunts and screams. Dick points to someone. You there. Come on up here, sweetheart. It's the little girl, the one the mother was licking clean. She's completely normal looking, you know, except for all the blood and spit glazing her face. Just a young girl with a high ponytail and a striped dress. She daintily stepped onto the stage. The stagehand Dick had motioned to appeared on screen. He was male, you could tell that much. Just wore a dirty cloth around his waist. His chest had big areas of skin removed, leaving wide patches of just gray scar tissue. And his face, good Christ, his face. The number 9 was branded there. The top round part circled his left eye, and the tail end stretched all the way through his lips and to his chin. It just seeped fluid like he had been branded recently and hadn't healed. And he had a hammer. My father had been a butcher, and I'd seen a meat mallet plenty of times, but never that size. It looked like someone had made a 10-pound sledge to tenderize meat. The 9 eye was static, like when your TV loses signal, just illuminated and scrambled and fuzzy. You get what I'm saying? His normal eye, normal, well, it just stared ahead. He came up behind Jim and hit him in the small of his back with the flat side of the mallet. Not too hard, just enough to stun him. I could hear the hollow thump, though, the smack of the flat metal on flesh. The poor bastard fell on all fours like somebody had hit him with a taser. Dick greets the girl at the podium. They're talking away from the microphone, smiling, and then he hands her a knife. A small knife, like he had smaller ones on hand just in case he called a child to the stage. The girl walks over to Jim slowly, the audience cheering her on. She gives them a shy smile. Jim looks up at her. "Please," is all he gets out before the little monster hamstrings him with a quick chop of the knife. She sliced him right behind the knee like she had practiced it. I saw his hamstring pop like a cut rubber band and bunch up beneath the skin. He screamed, and the audience howled with laughter till you couldn't hear him anymore. "We're off to a great start, ladies and gentlemen," Dick yelled. "But we need to move on. Please give a warm welcome to our other contestant. She owns a catering business and loves having a pen dipped in her company ink. Wink, wink. Also from Suite 19. Welcome, Laura Johnston." I just sat there numb. Shocked, maybe? I don't know. Who fucking knows? The 9 man dragged my wife out by one ankle, her other leg kicking at him. Like Jim, her wrists were tied, and she had no clothes on. The body I knew like it was my own was on display for everyone to see. He dropped her ankle, then pulled her up by her hair with a hard yank. She stood, yelling and cursing until he let go. Dick walked over to her. "Now, Laura, it says here that you own a successful catering business. How did you get into that line of work?" Laura didn't even try to cover herself.
"What do you want from me?"
she hissed. Something dark flickered over Dick's face, like the shadow of a passing storm cloud. "I want you to talk about your work. You own a catering business, and Jim here is one of your staff, correct?" That's why the name sounded familiar. Jim was one of the newer cooks Laura had hired during the wedding season the year before. Laura didn't say anything, just gave a shaky nod. "Well, tell us, Laura," Dick said, his broad grin back on his face. He had perfect teeth. They damn near glowed. "What exactly were the two of you cooking up in Suite 19 of the Manchester Inn this evening? Was it something hot?" He looked to the crowd and winked. "It's crazy, you know. Emotions in general. I was sitting there with the flu, wrapped in a blanket and sweating, and this show was on. And I'm obviously imagining it, right? None of that shit could be real. But I knew at least part of it was. Her late nights, long weekends, the conferences out of state. The craziest part? I'm looking at Jim and thinking, he's got a punch, and he's not even packing downstairs. There's a game show that shouldn't be on where people are being tortured, and I'm looking at this guy comparing myself to him. It was fucking nuts." Dick called over to Jim. "What about you, sport? Was it steamy?" He didn't say anything either. He just laid there whimpering, holding his leg. "Oh, sorry, ladies and gentlemen. I guess the cat still has his tongue." Dick dropped him another wink and flicked his tongue from between his lips rapidly. Jesus, they loved that. 2 fights broke out between peals of laughter. One man grabbed another by his hair, wrenched his head back, then bit into his throat. Blood ran down the front of his pressed shirt as he shook. What? No, come on, Doc. What the hell were the police gonna do? What would I say? Officer, please help me. My wife is being held hostage on a game show that was filmed 50-something years ago. Don't get me wrong, it passed my mind. But all I ended up doing was snatching up the remote and pressing record for the DVR to grab whatever I could. I couldn't even tell you why, other than I knew that no one would believe me if I didn't have some sort of proof, or I wouldn't believe it myself later. Dick stepped between the first 2 columns and said, "In keeping with the spirit of the evening, tonight we will be featuring a cooking challenge. But first, I need to ask our first question. What do you say, folks?" Applause. The audience smelled blood and they were frenzied, like starving animals at the smell of meat. Contestants, please make your way onto the first cloud. Laura shook like a scared rabbit, but climbed the 2 steps up the platform. Jim tried to stand, but failed. "Please, I can't walk." "Oh, Jim, I bet you wish you would have kept your dirty mouth shut now," Dick told him. "Mr. Nine, please assist him." Mr. Nine slid the mallet's handle into a makeshift leather holster on his waist, grabbed Jim by one ankle and by the hair on his head, then lifted him from the floor. He walked while Jim screamed, then tossed him up onto the platform like a sack of rocks. Mr. Nine looked to Laura with an expression like flat murder. She got the hint and stepped up on the platform quickly. "Well, well, Jimbo," Dick said, walking over and crouching down near the platform. "It's time for your question. Get it right, and you get to climb 1 whole step closer to happiness. Get it wrong, and Mr. Nine will break every single finger on your left hand. Understood?" Jim nodded, his face wet with tears. Yeah, he nodded, but I don't think Jim was really there anymore, you know? He looked like a man who was waiting to wake up from a nightmare, and I guess that's what he was. "Splendid," Dick said. "Here's your question. Did you know Laura was married when you started cooking together?" He started to speak but stopped. He nodded again weakly. Dick's face was stern, then his radiant smile appeared once more. "Correct. It's so nice to know that you're capable of being an honest man, if not a moral one. Mr. Nine, please crush his fingers." Mr. Nine quickly slammed his hammer down on Jim's left hand. Jim didn't just scream, he howled. He pulled his ruined hand back quickly and cradled it to his chest, rocking back and forth, his fingers pointing out at strange angles. Dick did a quick dance step, spun, then walked over to where Laura sat horrified. "And here is your question, Laura, my dear. What type of knife has a narrow blade, a sharp point, and is primarily used to remove bones from meat?" Laura blinked slowly, like she was coming out of a dream.
What?
"Here," Dick said, drawing a knife from his pocket. "A visual aid." He threw the knife down. The blade slammed into the platform with a thunk, its handle quivering from the impact. Laura stared at it for a minute, then answered.
"A boning knife."
"Correct," Dick said, and the audience booed and hissed. "And since both of you answered correctly, we're headed to Cloud 2. Contestants, next platform, please." Laura rose and stepped gingerly over to the next platform. Jim looked at Mr. Nine, then hurriedly crawled up onto Cloud 2. A kind of trap door opened, and out rose these tables, each with different kinds of knives, short, long, serrated, smooth, just all kinds of blades. Dick continued. "Okay, here's the rules. Each contestant must prepare a dish with meat cut from their own bodies." Jim moaned pitifully, and Laura began to weep softly. I could still hear them when I think about it. And you must eat it, of course. But here's where it gets interesting. Different parts mean more points. Feeling squeamish and just want to take a toe? That won't even get you to the next cloud. But if you use some imagination, you may make it all the way to Cloud 9. Thunderous applause came from the audience. Each clap of hands seemed to vibrate the screen a little. And you'll have to hurry, folks. You only have 5 minutes to butcher yourselves. And it starts now! A large clock was lowered from the ceiling. Old dried blood crusted across its face. Laura shakily approached her table.
But, how do we cook it?
Dick spun and pointed to the audience, and they all started screaming and chanting in unison. Eat it raw! Eat it raw! Eat it raw! Jim broke first. I guess because he had already been hurt, already knew they were serious. He reached for a knife and grabbed the first one his hand touched. A cheap-looking steak knife, its wooden handle already beginning to splinter. Dick pointed to the clock and said, "Tick-tock, chop-chop." I don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect to see Laura just walk off the platform. She hopped down and made her way over to the other cloud, the one Jim was on. She took the knife from him gently, then she just put it down. The audience screamed and booed. Hisses rose from the crowd as if they were snakes, and maybe they were.
No,
She said to Jim.
we're not going to hurt ourselves for their amusement.
I won't lie, even under the circumstances, I was kind of proud of her. She'd always been tough with a backbone of steel. What the hell was she doing with someone like Jim? Well, it will just stay part of the mystery, along with the rest of this shit. Dick's smile faltered and his eyes were shiny. Eat or die. She shook her head. Boy, oh boy, you are pissing me off, Dick said. Fine. It looks like we have a tie. More fighting in the audience, more screams and blood. Well, that doesn't sound very impartial. I guess we'll have to ask our viewers at home. Dick walked over to the camera and peered directly into it. What do you think? I just stared at the screen, numb and unable to look away. Yes, you. He poked a finger at the camera and I jumped a little. Answer the question. Live or die? I realized that somehow he was talking to me. I stammered. I don't know. I can't make... Dick grabbed the camera, pressing his face against the lens, his lips leaving wet streaks as he spoke seductively. Answer the question. It's a tie, so you must pick. Live or die. They both live, or they both die. No breaking up the happy couple. Both or none. Now choose. I couldn't do it. I shook my head back and forth, my fever sweat running down my face. Dick pulled his fist back and drove it into the lens. My screen cracked, and the TV wobbled back and forth on top of its stand. His hair became disheveled, and I could see the veins in his forehead pulsing. Answer the question, you fucking pussy! He screamed. Will you let them live after what they have done? Let them walk away filled with sweet memories while you spend the rest of your life agonizing over every little detail. You will think and think and think, and their passion will never leave your brain. When you wake, you will think of the affair. When you eat, sleep, bathe, it will always be scurrying through your skull like an infestation of images. Where is the justice in that? Just say the word, and I will give you what no one else can. Vengeance, with no traceable evidence. Just say the word, and the hammer will fall. I looked at my wife, small, naked, and defenseless. I couldn't let them murder her, you know. I'm not a monster. Just seeing her like that made me want to hold her, protect her, even after what she did. Laura reached over and pulled Jim's head toward her own and kissed him softly, then held him. She whispered to him. I couldn't hear it, but I imagined it was comforting because he settled a bit. I began to cry. Not blubbering or anything, but I could feel my tears running over my cheeks. They felt very hot on my skin. I loved her more than anything. I really did. But in that moment, something in me died. I had hoped the affair was just physical, a distraction after our 15 years of marriage, but I was wrong. She loved him. My mind was flooded with images of them together, like watching someone shuffle a deck of cards. Pictures of them laughing, smiling, fucking. Was he better than me? Did she talk about me behind my back? What was so wrong with me that she ran to him? Over and over, images of flesh and teeth and love and whispers. Kill them. Kill him both. Dick grinned. He smiled so wide that his lips split, and blood ran over his chin. You've got it. Mr. Nine, please do us the honor. Jim backed away from Laura, his eyes wide and his arms held high. Please, please don't. The man thing with the 9 on his face drew his mallet, raising it high above his head. Please, Jim whined. He brought the hammer down on Jim's skull. God, I wish I could forget that sound. You ever stepped on a frozen lake and had the ice crack beneath you? Like that. Blood sprayed across Laura's face, and for the first time, she screamed. Jim slumped down, and one of his eyes just... Christ! The audience went nuts. Mr. Nine swung the mallet across Laura's face, and her scream stopped. It must have broken her jaw because it was all moans after that. He flipped the mallet to the other side, the pointed side with the little pyramid-shaped spikes, and I don't know why I watched, but I did. Dick clapped to himself. Ah, what fun! Justice was served and a good time was had by all. He looked at Jim's ruined skull. Well, most. And that's all the time we have for today, folks. Thanks to our contestants. The camera panned to Mr. Nine's work in progress, and to our studio audience. The camera panned across the audience. They were all clapping, of course, all except 2 of them. Near the top row sat Jim and Laura, clothed now and obviously confused but looking unhurt. She looked over at Jim. Horror and comprehension spread across her face as he smiled and began clapping. That smile. God damn. His smile looked like someone had used fish hooks and line to force him to do it. Like he was a puppet or something. And of course, Dick said, a final word to you at home. You'll never ever be whole again. Thank you and good night. The credits began to roll over the screen as the theme song played. They weren't actual jobs for a TV show. It was odd things like torture engineer and zookeeper, and the names given were just strings of letters that didn't make any sense. At least, not to me. In the background, Mr. Nine threw Laura's body over his shoulder, her head a dripping mess. He looked at the camera, at me, and smiled. I shook violently and threw up. I couldn't help it. That's it. That's what happened. Nothing else after that. A completely normal episode of Drive Away Giveaway came on, and I sat there with vomit down the front of my shirt, wondering what the fuck just happened. By the next afternoon, the police were at my door with more questions than answers. I didn't know what to say to them. I loved my wife, I did. I never wanted... Are we done for now, Doc? I don't really feel like talking anymore. From the office of Robert Floyd, M.D., continued. Unpleasant, isn't it? I should say up front that this statement isn't what cleared him. There just wasn't any evidence to connect him to the crime. If he had never called the hotel looking for his wife, someone would have found the bodies eventually, and no fingers would have been pointed. And it doesn't matter, considering there was very little chance that the flu-ridden man could have made it to a location 2 states away and back in that time frame. I know what rumors flew around, but I've had access to everything from the start, and I can assure you that there were no fingerprints on that hammer. Not Stephen's, not anyone's. I've listened to Stephen's story multiple times, and I still can't draw a definite conclusion. Besides the obvious that this was a delusion or a hallucination brought on by sickness and stress, there are still inconsistencies that trouble me. Of course, finding out your wife was murdered while she was staying in a hotel with another man could cause extreme emotional trauma, but still there are oddities. It would be easy to dismiss the story as one of the examples I've given, but both are usually temporary in nature, and that is the case here. Stephen does not believe that any of what happened on the TV was real. What's troubling is that even though he believes it was all a hallucination, he insists that the series itself was real, that Cloud 9 was an actual game show that aired on television years ago. He does not, however, believe that the episode in question existed. He also asserts certain products are real and cannot handle being told otherwise. For example, when confronted with evidence that there has never been a show about a spy named Jack Cave, he gets terribly upset. During one of our earlier sessions, I brought him a package of NyQuil, what he referred to as nighttime, and was promptly accused of fabricating it to make him look crazy. As for the recording of the episode in question, it was almost entirely blank. There is less than a minute of actual footage out of approximately half an hour of static. It was from a black and white televised game show, but it only briefly shows the audience, then immediately cuts out. We've never been able to identify it, even after getting some assistance from representatives of the game show network. Note, do not call it that in front of the patient. I've also attached a clip for you to see, but I promise it's nothing exciting. I will say this. On the recording, if you pause it and look closely, there are a couple of people who really do favor his dead wife and her lover. It's mildly unsettling, but a coincidence nonetheless. Get back to me if you have any insight on this after you've had a chance to speak with him. Give my best to your wife and kids. Rob. Dr. Robert Floyd, M.D., Northern United Psychiatric Hospital.
Hey, you've reached Aaron and Katie. We aren't home right now, but leave us a message and we will get back to you. Thanks. Katie, this is your mother. You didn't call last night and missed lunch with us today. I'm getting very worried. Please call us back, okay? I listened to the message and looked down at my wife's bruise-colored face, her eyes glazed over and lips contorted. Her fingers fall limply from their grasp on my arm, finally dangling lifelessly at her side. My hands continue to shake, even after I let go of her neck, and she drops to the floor. Rage still burns through my veins while my heart continues to break. You're probably wondering what happened, or why I find myself in the situation that I'm in. You also may already think that I'm a terrible person. Before you jump to any definite conclusions, let me tell you the whole story of how I got here. Katie and I met in our early 20s, and she says it was love at first sight. She said she noticed me before I noticed her. We hung out after work one night, and that night turned into a relationship that lasted 8 years. She entered my bed and never left it. We seldom left each other's side. We lived together right away, always hung out together, and we even worked together at a few jobs over the years. We had a wonderful 5 years or so until we started to try to have children. That's when her depression started. She would withdraw and go quiet. Her silence was like ice, too cold for me to touch. I couldn't understand why things couldn't be happy with just us. I know how badly she wanted to be a mother, but we still had each other. We had a connection we dreamt about for most of our young lives that some people never find. We started with just the two of us and we're happy. We could still be happy, just the two of us. After about 2 years, I made an appointment with a fertility clinic. They both needed to be checked to see what the holdup was. They were able to find that Katie's fallopian tubes were ravaged with cysts and, sadly, had to be removed, right along with any hope or chance we had of having a biological child. Honestly, as terrible as it sounds, I'm glad we went. Not because of the result, but because they could find a problem that Katie had and fix it. I tried to be there for her, to sympathize and help her cope. The upcoming winter season didn't seem to be helping either. We tried marriage counseling and individual therapy for her. I even spoke to a few adoption lawyers to ask about the process to give us options. It's not what she had planned, but I always supported her and her dreams. If she wanted a baby and I couldn't give it to her, then this was the next best option for me. She wouldn't hear of it, of course. Adoption was like a dirty word to her. She cringed when I first said it. She couldn't handle the idea of raising someone that she didn't nurture and grow in her womb. Forget about saving another child's quality of life. She was too narcissistic for that. I'll only be a disappointment to them, Aaron. If I don't feel that connection, they will sense it, and that's not fair to them. You raise a child for the majority of their life, and that's just fine. However, when they get to a certain age, they want to know their birth parents. When you have no idea how many birth parents pop up wanting to know their kids. And wouldn't you know, it always seems to happen after they turn 18, she would say. No matter how I went about it, it always ended in tears, nights on the couch, and the silence of a frost-bitten atmosphere. She seemed to have started to come around after about a couple of months. I came home and found her listening to music and swirling around the kitchen tiles in her socks. She had painted her fingernails a metallic baby blue. In honor of wintertime, she told me excitedly. To me, her painting her nails was a great thing. If she's pampering herself, she was happy. She was present. She was my Katie again. I couldn't help but smile when I saw the woman I had married so many years ago. She even told me she joined a social media group about infertility and loved her support. It gave her strength to hear other people's struggles and get to share our own with people who truly understood. I was happy for her. I wanted to tell her that I was there for her too, and I also understood that if she shared with anyone, it needed to be me, her partner. I was the other person sitting in the chair when the doctor told us. I had visions and dreams crushed too. Well, she didn't need to hear that right now, though. Now she was happy. So I was happy. She certainly was getting support. Her phone would constantly vibrate with notifications and messages, sometimes at all hours of the night. I figured, well, it was a big group, and it's not the same time everywhere in the world. She must have set it to notify her every time someone posts something or likes something of hers. She needs support from women right now who understand. Katie took it very seriously. I'd hand her her phone when it was near me and went off. She would give me looks, like a kid gives his peeping neighbor during a test before covering his paper so he can't copy. "Hey, baby," she said, looking at me with dancing eyes. "You know, some of the women of the group are talking about picking a weekend and doing a spa meet and greet. It's to help put more people in contact with each other, for women to get pampered and cry on each other, you know, things like that. It's not like we have to find anyone to watch our kids." She tried to joke with a pained smile. "Does this sound like something you would like to go to with me?" Honestly, all of the crying would be so unsettling and awkward for me. Yes, I did love my wife. She's the only one I have ever loved in my life. However, infertility was already something I had made peace with and accepted months ago. I couldn't bring the level of understanding to the table needed for this. Would you like me to, honey? Or do you need to be with your new women friends? I honestly want to go and support you if you need me. However, it would be super awkward if I was one of the only men there. There are men in this group, right? When I said this, she tried to stifle a giggle by biting her lower lip. She shook her head no, and then burst into giggles, apologizing in between breaths. Not really, no. They're just a couple, and those are mainly joint accounts. Aaron, you don't have to go. I will be okay, and I understand, but I think this will help me. Besides, this will give us a chance to miss each other. I'm sure I'll come back refreshed. I won't think you're unsupportive or uncaring. It turned out that it was 2 weeks away and in the next state over. It would only take her 3.5 hours by car from where we lived. She would have no problem getting there and having her weekend and then driving back when she woke up on Monday. I planned to surprise her by making a meal and rearranging the living room while she was gone. I wanted to take care of all the little tasks she nagged me about, but I never got to while I had time to myself. The time came for her to leave. I sent her off with a kiss and my favorite t-shirt. I told her, "You wear this on your saddest cry day. I want to still be the one to wipe your tears even if I can't be there." Again, she got a pained look on her face, but she shook it off with a smile. "Thank you for understanding. I will miss you, and I'll call you every day," she told me. I kissed her, and then she left, driving off into her weekend of healing. After picking up and cleaning the floors, I was almost ready to start rearranging our living room. I had been putting off cleaning the dust off of the ceiling fans for way too long. Neither of us wanted to do it, but I was the taller one, so the task generally fell on me. She would be so happy. She'd be proud that I did that when she came home, a refreshed Katie coming home to a refreshed house. She called at around 9 p.m. and let me know that she got there all right and missed me already. She blew phone kisses after a knock at the door. "Hey, that's my friend. I'll call you in the morning, okay? I love you," she said, before getting off the phone. I hoped this would help her and help us be what we once were. Around the middle of the next day, Saturday, she informed me that her phone was dying. I looked at the counter and saw both of our wall chargers lying there, so I called her and told her just to use the car charger, but not to leave it in while the car was turned off because A, someone could steal her phone, and or B, it could kill her battery. She promised me that she would be fine, that she couldn't talk long, but she loved me and missed me like crazy. For the rest of the day, when I called, it would go to voicemail. I was just thankful she could tell me what had happened, so I wasn't worried when I suddenly couldn't reach her. I mean, she hadn't ever met these people before. They could have been anyone. Who knows the conclusions my mind would have jumped to. I should have made sure that she packed the charger. I sent her a "have fun, our bed is cold without you" text from work. I wanted my message of love to be the first thing she saw when her phone had more battery life. I couldn't wait to smell her hair again. Before long, it was Monday, the day she was to come home. We chattered excitedly on the phone for a minute while she packed. I rushed off the phone to get last-minute things ready for her arrival. Our home missed her as much as I did, I thought. It was so much darker without her here. The emptiness was swallowing me. I would be glad to have her here in my arms. I bought some Reunited and It Feels Good alcohol for us to enjoy, and then went home and waited. She walked through the door. I gave her a hug that lifted her off the ground. She did look different. I couldn't place it, but it was different. She almost held the glow of being centered, finally able to find some peace with herself. I was glad for that. We had both needed that for her. Seeing her so rejuvenated made me feel the same, and we relished our time together. We were so wrapped up that she completely forgot to say anything about the house. But that's okay, though. She's here now, and that's all I ever wanted. The holidays came and went, with Katie seeming like a bulb growing brighter every day. I was thankful she was able to turn it into positivity. For some childless couple, the holiday season can be a big slap in the face. Her group even did a Secret Santa, one of the members sending Katie a very name-brand, very expensive, very out-of-our-budget gift. I was happy for her. She deserved nice things. She really lucked out on her Secret Santa. One day, I had gotten a call when Katie was in the shower. Her mom said that her father had some chest pain, so she took him to the hospital. I relayed the message to her, and she rushed out. I handed her some clothes, her purse, and the keys. I lovingly told her to keep me updated on her way out. I hoped that my father-in-law was going to be okay. I would have gone with her, but I had to work in a little over an hour. I heard a buzzing and looked around our room to see where it was coming from. It sounded like a phone. I opened my phone to see that it wasn't mine. I got on the floor and peered under the bed, and there was Katie's phone. I figured it probably fell out of her purse when I picked it up to hand it to her earlier. I couldn't help myself. I unlocked her screen. What I saw made the color drain from my body and curdled my stomach instantly. Katie, I had so much fun this weekend. I can't believe how amazing everything was. I didn't even want to sleep. It's crazy how well things went. Now we know. Alan. Oh my God, hard same. I felt so comfortable with you. 3.5 days, it's like we've been together for years. Katie. I think this group will have monthly meetings if I can manage. We've been talking for so long, and then we met, and it was like an instant connection. I can't wait to see you again. I knew I loved you, and then it was confirmed for me 100% when I saw you. I can't wait to meet your son. Alan, me too. That's all I can think about. I know that my kid will love you just as much as I do. You are perfection. The total package. A trophy to be shown and proud of. To say you're hot would be an insult. You are beautiful in every way. Now that we know it's real, you have to work on your end of the situation. I won't be played for a chump. If you do love me and want to keep me, you need to do some decision-making. This isn't a game, and it's not a fairy tale. If your husband makes you happy, I'm out. But if you want me, do the work. Text me when it's okay to text back. I love you, gorgeous. I read the messages over and over again until the words blurred through my tears. My mind raced to try to think of something, anything, to make this look different from what it was. My wife knew when she asked me to come with her that I would say no. That's why she made it so easy for me. We had never taken separate getaways before. All of our vacations were always spent together. Oh, she had changed. She was happy. And now, I knew that it was because of him. Oh, she had healed all right. Healed herself right into someone else's family. She reacts like I say the word abortion instead of adoption. And now she can't wait to meet her son. It was all too much. She had thought that I wouldn't understand her healing process. And she was fucking right. There was nothing to make me understand this. When was she going to tell me? Was she going to tell me? Would I have just come home one day to a note saying, "Adios, Aaron. It's been fun." I raced to the trash can and threw up, my love turning to bile in my throat and spewing it out. All of her words, all of the love, the plans, the promises turned to poison in my heart. Every memory proved to be a lie, every struggle ultimately unfelt by her. Did she even want children with me? Did she ever love me? What was the point of all of this? Every single question branched off into 5 more questions, attacking my mind like a murder of crows. I lit a cigarette on the way to my car, drove to the corner store, and bought a lot of beer. I never drank before, but if there was ever a time for it, now was that time. I chugged one at the parking lot and opened another for the ride home. Father always did say that the road to a man's self-destruction always begins with a woman. And it looked like he was right, I thought, as I threw a crushed can out of the window. I lit another cigarette as I pulled into the driveway and saw her car there. Without thought or care, I drank 2 more before going inside, lit cigarette and all. She was sitting there on our bed with her phone lying in front of her with the screen lit up. Her eyes widened when she saw me smoking in the house. She opened her mouth to say something about it, but then quickly closed it, realizing the shots weren't hers to call here. She wasn't upset or crying. She just looked numb. I've never wanted to hit a woman in my life. My hand throbbed with desire to. I rubbed my hand to my jeans to try to disperse the energy. I loom over her and shout, "You can tell Alan that it's safe for him to message you now. He can message you anytime he wants, and it's not my problem anymore. You've never been who I thought you were. The past 8 years were all a lie," I said, as my words turned to shuddering sobs. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing my heart break, but I couldn't help it. Through all of my anger and hate, I still saw her sitting on the bed. She looked so small and lost. All I wanted to do was hold her. That wouldn't happen, though. Not ever again, if I could help it. She finally cried and apologized. She promised that she would end it and block him and get rid of social media entirely to work on us. She said she wanted to be a better wife and got lost. She said she got mixed up and the situation became too big for her to get out of, and she needed help. She had the gall to tell me that she was glad she got caught. And now, I could help her get out of it. She said she never stopped loving me, and never loved him. I felt neglected by you, Aaron. I felt like I lost you and myself when we couldn't have kids. I thought I had found myself and figured out my life. But I was wrong. I went to leave you. And I couldn't do it, Aaron. I will do anything to fix this. We can come out of this stronger and with a better understanding of each other, she said. We spent an entire week apart, me taking a little trip of my own out of state to clear my head. She went to my parents and cried to them about what she had done. She apologized for hurting their son and asked for forgiveness, figuring it would eventually lead to mine. Though manipulative and inconsiderate to my parents' mental health, it worked. She picked me up from the airport, and again, I hugged her so hard I lifted her off the ground. We went home and reconnected. We talked for hours into the night, and then again, when we woke up the next day. We had worked a lot out and decided what we needed from each other to get past this and not let it ruin us. The only thing I asked of her was to block his number from her phone and to never, under any circumstances, positive or negative, have contact with him again. This was my time to heal. and that was the only way I would be able to do it. I would not forgive her twice. Though I did not tell her at the time, she did ruin us. I saw Alan's picture next to his messages, so I knew his face. Every time I would kiss her or touch her, I would see his face, like a ghost. Alan making her laugh, him kissing her forehead, him making her sweat. I hated it. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. Despite everything, she was still the woman I loved, and always would be. Even if I did leave her, we would get through this. A part of me died when I found out what she did. Maybe that part will grow back stronger, better. A few more months went by. Valentine's Day came and went with no issue. I was nervous about it, but Katie tried her best to make sure it was a good day for me, for us. I started to see the ghost of Alan less and less. Katie was turning into the woman I married again. It was terrible that she needed this to get back to that, but I could work it out as long as I had her. She would never leave me again. She promised. She had deleted social media, as promised, and Alan's number remained blocked. My heart started to heal slowly. I was well on my way in love with her again, not like nothing happened, but like we didn't let it break us. I stopped checking up on her as much. She felt terrible about it and seemed to punish herself more any day than I ever could. So, we let it fade into the past. She'd never leave me again. She promised. Hey, Aaron, can you please look at my phone? I think I have some sort of virus, she asked, her gray eyes heavy with concern. I laughed at her and joked, You know how you got that, don't you? Too much freaky peeky. What kind of sick shit have you been looking up? She slapped at my arm, giggling on her way to our kitchen. No, come on! I can't get any of my pictures to load, and I wanted to send some to Mom. You're off today, please. I told her I would help her and to give me an hour with her phone. I would back up her pictures and factory reset if the problem was too bad. I transferred her pictures over to our computer just in case. Then, I unplugged her phone and looked through her message to make sure she didn't lose any critical numbers or pictures if I reset it. I went to the text setting to see any locked or starred messages with pictures of us. I saw an option on the phone that said, Blocked Messages. With very wary but overwhelming curiosity, I opened the folder. There were so many. All from Alan. I'm sorry about how I act sometimes. You know I love you. I just think that when two people want to be together, that they should do anything they can to do so. It's hard for me to imagine the situation you're in at home, and I just get frustrated. Tell me you're thinking of me. I love you, Toots. Just want you to know that no matter how mad I get at you, I could never stop loving you, and I'll never turn my back on you. You look beautiful today. I love talking to you. It's been the best part of my day for months. Good morning. You are rocking it today, babe. They went on and on like that, and my mind snapped. The frail bandages holding my fragile heart and mentality all fell away. I looked over to her across the room. My breath was coming out in faster and bigger huffs, and my face was burning red. She looked at me confusedly. What? Before she finished her word, I was out of my chair and in front of her. The time for words has ended. Now, I only asked you for one thing. Just one fucking thing! I stood up to leave as she launched off the couch, throwing herself on me. Aaron, please, I don't understand. We've come so far and I've worked so hard. Why would I do that to just talk to him again? I haven't been talking to him. Don't go anywhere. I know I messed up last year, but I wouldn't do that again. Her sobs grew louder. No way. There's no way that she gets to be the one to cry here. She doesn't get to feel anything but shame right now. I'm the one who should have been crying. But of course, everything was always about her. I couldn't even have feelings without her trying to steal them so she could end up being the victim. I had to stop it. Get her to be quiet. I slammed my hand over her mouth, but she still sobbed, soaking my hand in snot and tears. Her wails grew louder and louder, repeating the same words over and over. It was as if she thought the more she said them, the more I would have believed her. The only things that I do believe are that I can't bounce back from this twice, that I can't live with her, and I can't live without her, as the saying goes. My hand dropped from her mouth to her throat, the other coming up to meet it. Now, it was my turn to feel. I cried and sobbed, and I squeezed my hands tighter and tighter. Her eyes bulged with betrayal and fear as the edges of her face began to purple. Fragmented wedding vows grunted out through my teeth as I heaved with tears. I wanted my face to be the last thing she saw as the life that she decided to throw away faded out of her eyes. Her wails turned to whimpers until finally, barely any sound could escape at all. Till death do us part, my darling. And I promise I won't be far behind. So, this is how we got here. My mother-in-law's voice on the home answering machine. Her daughter turning colder by the minute on the floor. My hands are shaking, and my sides are sore from the sobs. The light of my life is gone. Why did she have to do this to us again? She always said she was born to be my wife and that she would die for me. Well, here we are. She ended up being true to her word in one sense. At least through all of this. I rechecked the block list and see a new message from 18 minutes ago. I love the way you smell. It read. Enough of this shit. I hit the call button on the message. It rings and rings until finally, a woman picks up. Before I have any room to say anything, she starts yelling at me. You have to be some kind of stupid to continue to call after everything you've done, Katie. The woman said my wife's name as if it was disgusting on her tongue. She continues. As far as his son and I are concerned, you might as well have been driving the car that killed him. Do you know he had messages set up pre-scheduled to send you for 2 months? It's nice to know you have messages from him after he's dead. But what about his son, you heartless slut? She's going on and on, hysterical with fury. I tune her out and hang up the phone without a word. I think, really think, about what she'd said. She said the words, kill, and pre-scheduled messages. Katie was telling the truth. She hadn't contacted him. This also explained why he still went on and on as if they were together. It was over. She really was mine again. Oh my God. Oh my God. run to the bathroom, rifle through the medicine cabinet, and grab a bottle. The neighbors heard the noise and called the police already. I don't know if I will have the courage to take the contents of this bottle before they break the door down. For now, I'm going to snuggle up to my beautiful bride. I will hold her for as long as I can and not let go. I hold her and smell her hair as I wait for the knock to come to the door. They can try, but I'll never let go. She will never leave me again. She promised. Till death do us part, sweetheart. Till death do us part.
Chilling tales for dark nights.